Rick, a washed-up 32-year-old office loser, decides he's gonna be a badass adventurer. Like, seriously, dude's got more years on him than most adventurers have teeth, but he thinks he's hot shit, but he is just a ugly, pathetic loser. He's been training with the world's strongest party, but let's be real, he's probably just the water boy. Now this old fart's out there, stumbling around, facing off against monsters that could eat him alive. He thinks he's some kind of hero, but he's just a joke. A pathetic joke. All he's got is a bit of luck and a sense of humor that's drier than the desert. The story begins and we see Rick was a total wreck, all beat up and bruised after some crazy training session. He thought he was gonna die, but his mentors were all, "Nah, dude, you are good." They were hyped, acting like he was some kind of hero. Sure, the praise was nice, but he needed a medic, like, yesterday. Adventuring was for young kids, not old farts like him. But Rick was a stubborn idiot who thought he could still cut it. He went to the front desk to sign up for the E-rank exams, and the receptionist's jaw dropped. Turns out, they knew each other from way back. Rick had just quit his job to become some kind of hero. The receptionist was like, "WTF? What? Dude," at the time, but now she was even more shocked. Most people his age were living normal lives, not risking their necks for a bit of treasure. Curious about what he'd been up to, she asked him what he'd been doing. Rick told her he'd been training his ass off in the mountains with some weirdo mentors. It had been tough, but he thought he was ready to face whatever crap came his way. Just then, the guild's usual drunkard walks up to the front desk and starts flirting with the receptionist. When she tries to decline because she is still obviously working, the guy doesn't take no for an answer. He starts getting rough with the receptionist, and that's when Rick decides to step in. He pulls the guy aside and lightly taps his stomach with enough force to knock him out instantly. The receptionist apologizes for the inconvenience the drunk guy caused him, but Rick says it's fine since he used to work as a receptionist as well. He still doesn't understand why the guild thinks it's a good idea to serve alcohol in here. After Rick receives his exam number, he heads outside where a maid named Rionette greets him. She asks if Rick is done with his registration, and Rick confirms, thanking her for waiting for him. While he says this, he's intently staring at Rionette's big milkers. She calls him out on this, so Rick tries to change the subject, talking about how excited he is for the exam. Back inside the guild, the other adventurers are stunned by the clear handprint left on the drunk guy's armor. This armor is made of dense steel, so whoever did this must be extremely strong. Just then, two adventurers walk in and recognize the drunk guy from a mugshot they saw recently. His name is Donald, and he's an A-rank adventurer wanted for multiple assaults. The receptionist realizes that Rick must have been the one to take down Domal. If Rick can handle an A-rank adventurer, he may be overqualified for the tasks ahead. Meanwhile, Rick undergoes a physical exam. His height is recorded at about 5'8". The physicians are surprised that a 30-year-old pathetic loser like Rick is taking this test. Following the physical, all examinees are led to a room where they're instructed to place their hands on a crystal ball to measure their mana. The ball glows according to the level of mana each person possesses. Others touch the ball, getting varied results, the highest being AC. When it's Rick's turn, the orb barely lights up, leading the examiner to give Rick an F on his mana exam. The other candidates mock Rick for his low score as he leaves. However, as the next candidate approaches, the orb spontaneously shatters. The next test was stupidity as they had to hit a stupid slime bag as hard as they could. Rick remembered his crazy mentor telling him he had to break a gold slime bag with his bare hands to be a real adventurer. At first, Rick was like, yeah, right, but then he saw his mentor smash one with one punch. So, he trained like a madman, punching that bag 10,000 times a day. Now it was time for the real deal. One by one, the other candidates stepped up and showed off their strength. Then, the second son of the Diarmuid family, some 15-year-old brat, was called up. Rumor had it he was a magic prodigy, stronger than most C-rank adventurers. The kid stepped up and cast a spell called Hell's Flame. Everyone was expecting a huge fireball, but nope. He shot a tiny little flame at the bag. It was pathetic. But the judges were all a bunch of idiots as they tell him that it is amazing. Rick was like, what the heck? That kid's fireball was weak sauce compared to my teacher's. Maybe the kid was just holding back, trying to not blow up the whole testing area. As the tests kept going, it was finally Rick's turn. He walked up to the slime bag, ready to show them what he was made of. But before he could even swing, the examiner stopped him. The examiner was like, you are over 30? Seriously? You are too old for this. You failed the mana test, so just give up. Don't embarrass yourself. The guy was a total jerk. Rick felt a wave of doubt. Maybe they were right. Maybe he was too old for this. But then he remembered all the hard work he'd put in. He'd punched those slime bags till his knuckles were bloody. He wasn't going to give up now. He took a deep breath and swung at the bag. Boom! The bag exploded into a million pieces.
Damn!
Even Rick was surprised. He hadn't expected that. The Diarmuid kid was fuming. He was supposed to be the star, but Rick stole the show. But the kid was cocky. He thought he'd win the next round with his fancy defensive magic. Wrong. Rick blocked the kid's strongest spell without even breaking a sweat. The examiner was impressed, but he was still being a jerk. He told Rick to use a stronger spell, like he wasn't already giving it his all. Rick, however, explains that he doesn't know any spells above the first order level. He admits that his magical abilities are limited to just the first order spells, but reassures the examiner that he is doing his best with the skills he has. The examiner is shocked by this. Considering Rick's impressive control over his mana, the examiner expected him to know more powerful spells. Rick responds confidently, saying that he believes his first order spells will be enough to deal with anything the examiner can throw at him. The examiner takes this as a challenge and is insulted by Rick's confidence. He decides to teach Rick a lesson and prepares to cast a fifth order spell, something much more powerful than anything Rick has seen. As he starts casting the spell, a huge shockwave bursts from the cyclone he summons, sending ripples of force through the air. The impact is so strong that the shockwave travels all the way through the kingdom, and even a knight across town hears the enormous sound. A few minutes later, Sylvester, a senior member of the guild, arrives at the exam center, wondering what all the commotion is about. He is told that an F-rank adventurer, Rick, not only destroyed a slime bag with his bare hands but also managed to block the fifth order spell using only basic first order defense magic. Sylvester is in disbelief and thinks someone is joking with him, but the person speaking is completely serious. Meanwhile, Rick is busy taking the written part of the exam. He feels confident in his knowledge and believes he will do very well. After finishing the test, he takes a break with his friend Rionette. She asks how the written test went, and Rick proudly tells her that he's certain he will score 100%. After all, he worked for years as a receptionist at the guild, so he's had plenty of time to learn everything needed for this exam. Despite his confidence in the written part, Rick is still unsure if his overall scores will be high enough to pass the whole exam. Rionette asks if he's worried about his practical exam scores, but Rick reassures her that he did well in all the categories. The only problem is that he scored an F in his mana exam, and he isn't sure how much that will hurt his chances of passing. Rionette tries to comfort him, telling him not to worry. She believes all the hard work he did in preparation will make up for it. The little brat, Freed, stormed over to Rick, all red in the face. He was pissed that Rick had done so well on the tests. Rick thought Freed was just lost or something. But no, the kid was crying because Rick had upstaged him. Freed's sister, Angelica, showed up and started yelling at Rick too. She was blaming Rick for making her brother cry. Rick was just trying to explain himself, but they weren't listening. They kept calling him a 30-year-old man like it was some insult. Rick was a bit annoyed, but he wasn't going to let them get to him. He didn't mean to ruin Freed's day, but he wasn't going to apologize for trying his best. Freed was just a spoiled brat who couldn't handle losing. Rick was focused on finishing the exam. He'd worked too hard to let some kid's tantrum get in the way. He was going to prove to everyone that age didn't matter. He was going to show them all that he was a force to be reckoned with. Angelica, furious at Rick, throws her glove at him, unknowingly issuing a formal duel challenge. Rick, unaware of this tradition, picks it up to prevent it from getting dirty. Unfortunately, this act is considered acceptance of the duel. Angelica eagerly sets the terms: the loser will serve the winner for life. She claims she'll enjoy punishing Rick for making her brother cry but insists they follow proper rules. Angelica is a second-class royal knight, which Rionette explains is roughly equivalent to a B-rank adventurer, strong enough to handle huge monsters alone. Rick panics since he's only an F-rank and can't imagine holding back as Rionette suggests. But Rionette reminds him of his rigorous training over the years. As Rick recalls the torturous sessions, he vomits, cursing Rionette for the memories. She reassures him, emphasizing that as a member of the strongest party on the continent, he's far more capable than he realizes. Gathering courage, Rick faces Angelica. She confidently promises to hold back to avoid killing him, then shows off her speed using Blink Step, earning her the nickname Lightspeed Angelica. However, Rick is unimpressed. Her speed is slower than his normal running pace. Dodging easily, Rick begins questioning her reputation. Angelica rationalizes her failure as Rick getting lucky and tries again, only to trip on a rock and unleash unpredictable, chaotic strikes. Rick struggles to dodge the unintended flurry, but Angelica claims she planned it all, determined to increase her speed even further. Using her ultimate technique to move 3 times faster, Angelica still appears slow to Rick. Cautious, he avoids attacking, unsure if she's hiding more tricks. In desperation, Angelica launches one last charge but trips again. This time, Rick punches the ground while attempting to intercept her, leaving a massive hole. Angelica, terrified by the power of his near hit, surrenders immediately, realizing she would have died if the punch had connected. Rick just shrugged off the little brat, freed. He wasn't gonna waste his time with that loser. When the exam results came out, Rick was worried he'd failed, but his ticket lit up blue. He was in. He headed out with Rionette, but then some douchebag named Rasta showed up. This guy was a total tool, all dressed up in fancy clothes and reeking of perfume. He tried to hit on Rionette, asking her to be his second wife. Rick wasn't having it. He told Rasta to back off, saying Rionette was his girlfriend. Rasta laughed at him, calling him a loser F-rank adventurer. He said he'd make Rick pay during the next stage of the exam. Rionette thanked Rick for standing up for her. She actually seemed to like him as she wanted to reveal her plot armor only to Rick whenever she is going to get the chance. Later, Rick met Lynx, a cool B-rank adventurer who was supposed to be his test proctor. But Rasta, being a total jerk, rigged the system to take over. He was out to get Rick, and he was gonna make his life miserable. Rionette warned Rick that Rasta was known for screwing over F-rankers. Now, Rick was in for it. Rasta was about to start messing with the other examinees, freezing them with ice magic. Rick knew he was gonna be next. He was ready to fight back, no matter what it took. Rionette can't understand why Rick is so worried about facing Rasta. She tells him he just needs to beat him. Rick, however, sees it as impossible. Rasta is a highly respected A-rank adventurer, while Rick is stuck at F-rank. To Rick, it feels like a death sentence to even try. But if he backs out, Rionette has promised to triple his already grueling training schedule. Rionette steps in front of Rick, looking him straight in the eye, and asks if he really thinks he's so unskilled. Rick admits he does. He switched to being an adventurer late in life, and people constantly remind him he's too old for the job. Rionette dismisses those comments, telling Rick not to let others' opinions shake his confidence. What matters, she says, is that she believes in him. Even if Rick can't trust himself, Rionette urges him to trust her belief in him. Rick feels encouraged by her words, thanking her for her support. With his spirits lifted, he starts to believe he might stand a chance. Just when things couldn't get any weirder, some creepy kid in a cloak offered Rick a free fortune-telling session. Rionette was like, "Dude, that's sketchy," but Rick was too dumb to listen. Next thing they knew, Rick was gone, spoofed away by some weird magic. It turned out the kid was Freed, the same brat who was jealous of Rick earlier. He was laughing his ass off, thinking he was so clever. But Rionette wasn't having it. She grabbed him by the neck and squeezed until he spilled the beans. Freed said he could only teleport people a short distance, so Rick was probably nearby. Rick found himself by the river, confused as hell. Before he could figure out what was going on, a bunch of tough-looking guys showed up. They were the Deria family's elite guard, and they were out to beat him up. Rick knew it was Raster's doing. The elite guard was way stronger than Rick, but he wasn't going to go down without a fight. Just when things were looking bleak, Rick's party members showed up. They looked pissed off, and Rick knew he was in trouble. He quickly lied and said the elite guard was helping him train. One of Rick's party members, Brufston, was ready to join the training. The elite guard leader thought Brufston was just another weakling, but he was about to learn a hard lesson. Brufston blocked a sword strike with his bare hand, shattering the blade like it was nothing. The elite guard was terrified. Brufston praises one of the guards for building up his physical strength but criticizes him for not strengthening his weapon enough to keep it from breaking. Frustrated, the guard decides to fight with his fists. Unfortunately for him, it doesn't go well. Brufston grabs his hand, crushing it until it turns purple. Brufston then calmly assures the man that he'll heal his hand with magic, so there's no need to worry. The leader of the elite guard starts to realize how badly he miscalculated by attacking Rick's group. It's becoming clear that these adventurers are far stronger than they appear. Meanwhile, Mizzet asks Rick if the guards really came to pick a fight with him. When Rick confirms it, Mizzet claims he'll handle things peacefully. However, his idea of peaceful involves pulling out a bizarre weapon called a Super Fire Barrel Mk2 rifle and firing it at the guards, knocking them all to the ground. Rick yells at Mizzet for supposedly killing everyone when he promised to resolve things without violence. But Mizzet insists none of the guards are dead, probably. One of the guards, desperate to turn the tide, grabs Elise, a young member of Rick's party, as a hostage. He thinks he's gained the upper hand but has no idea how big of a mistake he's made. Brufston wants him to let Elise go if he values his life. The guard ignores the advice and even hits Elise to make her stay quiet. That seals his fate. Elise responds by vaporizing him on the spot. The guards were freaking out. The leader realized he'd messed up big time. Turns out, Elise wasn't just some random girl, she was a freaking vampire prodigy and the strongest mage in the world, and she was only 15. And Mizzet, the little dwarf, was a genius inventor who could build crazy tech stuff. Then there was Brufston, the ORC, who was a total beast. Together, they were the Orichurcum Fist, a legendary party of S-rank adventurers. The guards knew they were totally screwed. The leader bailed, but the others were too stupid to run. They got what they deserved. Meanwhile, Rick and Rionette found Lynx, all beat up. Raster had been a total jerk to him, mocking his dream of building a school. He'd beaten Lynx up and told him to forget about helping kids. Rick was furious. He couldn't believe how cruel Raster was. He knew he had to do something to stop him. It was time to show everyone what he was really capable of. This fuels Rick's anger. While he had been nervous about facing Raster before, now he's determined to take him down. Before their fight begins, the story shifts to Adolf, a character with a unique ability. Adolf can see the power levels of anyone just by looking at them. He explains the 4 cores of power in this world: strength, dexterity, magic capacity, and magic control. To demonstrate, Adolf scans a random participant in the exam and sees that the person is incredibly weak. Adolf predicts they'll be eliminated by Raster in no time. When Adolf looks at Raster, he sees a powerhouse with immense mana capacity, though it strains his eyes to view such strength. But when he glances at Rick, Adolf's ability completely blinds him due to Rick's overwhelming potential. Up in the stands, Rick's former coworker, Alyssa Granger, approaches Rionette and introduces herself. She mentions seeing Rick with Rionette the day before and is delighted to hear that Rionette is part of Rick's new party. Rionette invites Alyssa to sit with them to watch Rick's test. Alyssa joins the group but is shocked to see Brufston, an ORC, among Rick's allies. Meanwhile, Mizette notices Alyssa and offers her a seat beside him. Rionette, knowing Mizette's flirtatious tendencies, quickly intervenes to stop him from bothering her. Finally, it was Rick's turn to shine. Rionette was confident he'd ace the test, but Alyssa was worried. She knew Raster was a total jerk who loved picking on weaker adventurers. The fight started, and Raster was all cocky, with his siblings cheering him on. He thought he was invincible, but Rick wasn't fazed. He calmly asked Raster why he became an adventurer. Raster, being the arrogant prick he was, said he only joined for the status. He loved using his A-rank card to bully people. He was a real piece of work. Disgusted by Raster's shallow reasoning, Rick declares he'll never lose to someone like him. Raster starts the fight by casting a low-level ice spell, purposely missing to mock Rick. But Rick stands still, following Rionette's advice to use the first minute of the battle to observe his opponent. Frustrated, Raster ups his game, casting a more powerful fire spell at Rick. The blast hits directly, but when the smoke clears, Rick is completely unharmed. Brufston, watching from the stands, explains to Alyssa that Rick's intense physical training has made him strong enough to withstand such attacks. Brufston reveals that Rick's mana capacity is low because he started adventuring late in life. To compensate, Rick trained rigorously in physical strength, magic control, and dexterity under the guidance of his party members. Rick doesn't realize how powerful he's become because his allies often tricked him into thinking F-rank adventurers were stronger than him. Growing frustrated, Raster unleashes a barrage of elemental attacks, throwing everything he has at Rick. Yet, Rick emerges from the onslaught completely unharmed. Furious, Raster decides to end things with brute force. He strengthens his body with magic and charges at Rick, intending to finish him off with a single punch. Rick, however, counters with his own punch, sending Raster flying across the arena. By observing Raster's movements, Rick realizes the truth: Raster's only advantage is his mana capacity. Beyond that, he's no match for Rick's skill and determination. Rick listens to Raster's shallow reasons for becoming an adventurer and refuses to lose to someone like him. Determined, he prepares to face Raster, who begins the battle by casting a level 1 ice spell. Raster purposely misses, mocking Rick for being too scared to move. However, Rick isn't frozen in fear. He's following Rionette's advice to stay calm and use the first minute of the fight to carefully observe Raster's moves. Raster doesn't wait long to attack again. This time, he casts a level 3 fire spell directly at Rick. The spell impresses Rick due to how quickly Raster executed it, but Rick remains still, continuing to observe. The fire blast hits him head-on. Alyssa, watching from the stands, is alarmed, but to everyone's surprise, Rick emerges from the attack completely unharmed. Brufston reassures Alyssa, explaining that Rick has trained hard to withstand attacks like this. He then gives some context about the 4 cores of power in their world: strength, dexterity, mana capacity, and mana control. Among these, Brufston points out that mana capacity must be cultivated from a young age. Since Rick only became an adventurer at 30, his mana capacity is naturally low. To make up for this, he worked relentlessly to improve his other stats. Brufston further explains how Rick trained. Brufston focused on Rick's physical strength by making him run between villages with 100-kilogram weights strapped to his ankles, while venomous snakes chased him through forests. Mizette, despite being notoriously lazy, committed to teaching Rick mana control so he could master magical defenses. Without this, Rick would have been reduced to ashes in his first few battles. Rionette trained Rick in dexterity, shocking Alyssa, who had assumed Rionette was just a maid. Rionette admits she wears maid outfits simply because she enjoys them. Rick poured every ounce of effort into his training under these 3. Unbeknownst to him, this has already made him as strong as an S-rank adventurer. However, Rick doesn't realize his strength because Brufston tricked him into believing even F-rank adventurers were stronger than him. Back in the arena, Raster continues to insult Rick and Lynx, mocking them for being too old to remain in the adventuring business. He begins casting a flurry of elemental attacks from his skill tree. After unleashing this overwhelming barrage, Rasta smugly assumes Rick must be injured or dead. However, Rick once again emerges completely unscathed, much to the horror of Rasta and his siblings. Frustrated by Rick's resilience, Rasta decides to finish the fight with physical attacks. He strengthens his hands and feet with magic and rushes at Rick. But as Rasta throws a punch, Rick counters with a strike of his own, sending Rasta flying backward. Rionet's advice to watch and learn from Rasta's movements has paid off. Rick now understands that Rasta's only real advantage is his larger mana capacity. Rasta hasn't put in the effort to refine his abilities, making him weaker overall. Although Rasta has the potential to be stronger, Rick realizes that right now, he is the more powerful fighter. Rasta, unwilling to admit defeat, tries to write off Rick's counterpunch as a lucky fluke. Determined to prove himself, Rasta starts chanting for a full incantation spell. The spell looks intimidating, but Rick easily blocks it with one hand and even mocks Rasta for his sloppy execution. Alyssa is shocked that Rick could block such a powerful spell with his low mana capacity. Mizet explains that Rick's training has given him exceptional mana control. Even though Rasta has more mana, Rick can use far less to produce the same effects. This efficiency gives Rick a significant edge in battle. Desperate to prove his superiority, Rasta attempts one final attack. However, Rick moves too fast for him, landing a powerful punch that forces Rasta to activate his iron body defense magic. At this point, Rasta realizes that Rick is far stronger than the average A-rank adventurer. Still, Rasta stubbornly claims Rick has only gotten lucky so far. Rick refuses to be manipulated by Rasta's false confidence. He knows his strength is real and hasn't even used any strengthening magic during the fight. Despite Rasta enhancing himself, Rick has been overpowering him with sheer skill and effort. Out of options, Rasta asks Rick how he became so strong with so little mana. Rick, offended by the implication of trickery, explains his grueling training process. He recalls being thrown into a dragon's lair and told he couldn't leave until he defeated the dragon. He endured countless powerful explosions and swam through swamps filled with monster goo, choking on it repeatedly. Alyssa is stunned by these stories and wonders how Rick could have survived. Brufston explains that Rick didn't survive, not always, at least. Thanks to Brufston's healing magic, Rick could be revived after every fatal incident. This relentless cycle of death and resurrection pushed Rick beyond his natural limits. Rick's allies had little regard for his safety, but their extreme methods paid off. For example, Mizet once pushed Rick off a cliff during training, only for Brufston to revive him. Alyssa and Rionet's training also resulted in countless injuries, but Rick always came back stronger. Rasta doesn't believe Rick's story. Even if such extreme training were possible, why would Rick willingly put himself through it? Rick reveals his dream, to one day kill Kaiser Alcipiat, the world's strongest monster. Rasta laughed his ass off, thinking Rick was crazy for believing in some mythical monster. He called Rick a fool and a dreamer. But Rick didn't care. He had a mission, and he wasn't going to let anyone stop him. Rasta got pissed and decided to end it quick. He cast a powerful spell to trap Rick, then started charging up his strongest attack. He was sure he'd win. But Rick had a trick up his sleeve. He was going to use a simple air shot spell to counter Rasta's attack. Rasta laughed at Rick, thinking he was crazy. But Rick had practiced that spell a million times. He knew it like the back of his hand. When Rasta attacked, Rick blocked it with his air shot. The two spells clashed, and Rasta's spell shattered. He was sent flying, totally humiliated. Everyone was shocked. An F-rank adventurer had just beaten an A-rank. Rick's friends weren't surprised at all. They knew he was capable of amazing things. Rick went to the locker room to celebrate with his friends. Alyssa was impressed, and Rick started to realize how strong he really was. He thanked his friends for all their help, but they told him to forget about it. It was time to party. Before they can leave, Rasta and his siblings enter the room. Rasta, clearly in pain from Rick's punch, stubbornly refuses any treatment. Rick approaches him and offers some honest advice instead of mocking him. Rick explains that his strength comes from focusing on mastering just a few techniques instead of trying to learn everything at once. He tells Rasta that if he wants to improve, he should refine a single skill until it pushes him to his limits. However, Rick says it's up to Rasta to decide if he wants to follow the advice. Surprisingly, Rasta seems humbled by the experience. As he walks past Rick, he quietly promises that when Rick faces his next promotion exam, Rasta will train hard enough to make sure he doesn't lose again. Angelica, one of Rasta's siblings, pauses before leaving to apologize for all the trouble they caused. She then helps Rasta leave the room. With the E-rank exams officially over, the announcer begins calling the names of those who passed. Rick eagerly waits to hear his name. Meanwhile, his friends are already celebrating in anticipation of his success. They're confident there's no way he could fail. When Rick's name is finally called, he passes his exam, though he seems more thoughtful than excited. Rionette notices Rick's calm reaction and asks why he isn't celebrating more. Rick explains that he has a lot on his mind. He recalls a moment from his childhood that set him on the path to becoming an adventurer. When Rick was a child, he read a storybook about a hero named Yamto. In the tale, Yamto battled the ultimate monster, Kaiser Alcipiet, in search of the legendary Akashic records. Although Yamto failed to defeat the monster, he left the Akashic records behind for future adventurers to find. This story inspired Rick to dream of becoming an adventurer just like Yamto. However, Rick's parents had different opinions about his dream. His mother, worried about the dangers of adventuring, gently suggested he consider a safer career. His father, on the other hand, was much harsher. He dismissed Rick's dreams, telling him to get a real job instead of wasting his life chasing fantasies. One day, during a routine checkup, Rick's doctor made a surprising discovery: Rick had an innate skill. These rare abilities are considered incredibly special, making Rick feel like he was destined for greatness, just like Yamto. The doctor warned him, though, that innate skills don't awaken immediately. It would take time before Rick could use his ability. Despite this, Rick was overjoyed. This brought him one step closer to becoming the adventurer he always wanted to be. The next day, Rick was all hyped up, thinking his skill would awaken any minute. But weeks turned into months, and nothing happened. His friends tried to cheer him up, saying he could still be a great adventurer even without a special skill. But Rick wasn't having it. He wanted to be like Yamto, a legendary hero. He told his parents he was giving up on his dream and getting a normal job. His dad was stoked, thinking Rick was finally being realistic. Years later, Rick was just a regular guy, working as a receptionist. He'd moved on, but sometimes he'd think about his old dream. It was a bit sad, but he'd made peace with it. He had a good life, with friends and family. One day, a new girl named Alisa started working there. She was struggling with all the paperwork, so Rick helped her out. He told her to take it easy and that she'd get the hang of it. He also warned her about some monsters that had been causing trouble lately. Alisa was grateful for the advice and started getting ready for the upcoming quest. Alisa left, and then Jed walked in, all proud of himself. He just passed his B-rank exam. Rick was happy for him, but deep down, he was jealous. Jed was living his dream, while Rick was stuck in a dead-end job. That night, Rick drowned his sorrows in booze. He thought about how far he could have gone if he'd stuck to his dream. But it was too late now. He had a stable job and a boring life. He was just a regular guy, nothing special. Suddenly, there was a commotion in town. A giant troll was going on a rampage. Rick, drunk as he was, ran towards the danger to save a woman who was about to get squashed. He didn't care if he died, he just wanted to help. Just as the troll was about to attack, Rionette, a badass adventurer, showed up and sliced the troll to pieces. She told Rick he was brave, but he shouldn't risk his life like that. She could handle herself. Grateful and curious, Rick walks with Rionette, and they exchange introductions. Rick, impressed by her strength, guesses she must be a B-rank adventurer. Rionette corrects him, saying she's not B-rank. Assuming she must be A-rank instead, Rick is amazed. A-rank adventurers are rare and highly skilled. But Rionette surprises him again, revealing her S-rank badge. Rick is stunned. S-rank adventurers are legendary, often removed from local guild rosters and assigned missions directly by headquarters. Excited but nervous, Rick asks Rionette a personal question. He shares his childhood dream of becoming an adventurer and defeating Kaiser Alcipiat, the ultimate monster. He asks if she thinks he could still achieve that dream, even though he's already 30 years old. Rionette, recalling his bravery earlier, believes Rick has the courage needed to be an adventurer. However, she explains that mana reserves, a critical resource for adventurers, are extremely difficult to develop after youth. In fact, she believes it's nearly impossible for someone Rick's age to build enough mana reserves to succeed as an adventurer. Hearing this, Rick feels disheartened but appreciates Rionette's honesty. He jokes about how meeting someone as beautiful as her makes up for the bad news and casually invites her to dinner. To his surprise, Rionette agrees and suggests they meet the next day for their date. The following day, Rick feels better than ever. He's in high spirits, determined to work harder than usual. When Jed comes in boasting about his B-rank status, Rick feels no jealousy this time and even wishes his friend luck on his next quest. After work, Rick eagerly heads to meet Rionette, hoping the date might lead to something more. However, as he nears the meeting spot, Rick hears screams of panic. Monsters are attacking the town again. His date plans are ruined, and he assumes Rionette must already be fighting. Rushing to find her, Rick sees her battling the monsters with ease. Rionette tells him to stay back while she handles the situation. Within moments, the battlefield is littered with monster remains, and Rionette barely looks winded. Rionette freaked out and froze up. A monster was charging at her, and Rick was like, "Oh crap, I'm screwed." But then Jed showed up, all badass and ready to fight. He said there was a monster attack, and he and his friends were called in to help. Rick was still jealous of Zed. He wanted to be out there fighting monsters, not working a boring desk job. Rionette warned Rick that there was a dragon nearby. She was too scared to fight it because of some bad memories. Rick didn't believe her at first, but then he saw the thing. It was huge and scary. He knew they were all gonna die. The guild rules said if you see a dragon, you just run away. But some idiot had attacked it, and now they were all trapped. It was a total disaster. Rick doubts a dragon would appear in the area, but his skepticism vanishes as a massive shadow passes overhead. Looking up, Rick sees the dragon Rionette warned him about. The sight of the creature leaves him in awe and terror, as he realizes the true scale of the threat they're facing. It's hard for Rick to believe that a dragon would show up in a human town. According to the guild's rules, if any adventurer below A rank encounters a dragon, the only thing they can do is stand still and hope the dragon leaves. No one is allowed to attack it. But when a nervous magician, part of a B-rank group, gets scared, he ignores the rules and attacks the dragon, which leads to disaster. The entire B-rank group is destroyed by the dragon. Jed, a friend of Rick's, immediately orders everyone to run, but before they can escape, they find themselves trapped in a magical barrier that the dragon has set up. It seems clear that the dragon doesn't want anyone to leave alive. The situation is hopeless, and it seems like they have no chance of surviving. However, Rick surprises everyone by calmly walking towards the dragon. Jed shouts for him to stop, reminding him that as a receptionist, he has no way of fighting the dragon. But Rick, feeling that he's going to die anyway, decides he might as well face his death head-on. He'd rather die like an adventurer, fighting for a cause. Rick has been trying to ignore his dreams of being an adventurer for years, but in this moment, the fire inside him flares up again. He picks up a rock and throws it at the dragon. Of course, it does nothing to the beast, but his act of bravery gives the other adventurers courage. They all start throwing everything they can at the dragon, even though they know their efforts will likely be in vain. The dragon got pissed and started breathing fire. Jed used some kind of shield to protect everyone, but it was still rough. Everyone was hurt, but Rick got back up, determined to fight. He walked towards the dragon and said he was going to be an adventurer, no matter what. The dragon tried to step on him, but then something crazy happened. Rick's body started glowing, and he was suddenly super strong. He pushed the dragon's foot off him like it was nothing. He realized that his dormant magic had finally awakened. It was like a superpower. With his new powers, Rick fought the dragon and beat it. He punched the dragon so hard, it just exploded. Rick was exhausted, but he'd done it. He'd defeated a dragon. When he woke up, he was in a hospital bed. Rionette, a super powerful adventurer, had been taking care of him. She said he'd pushed his body to the limit and almost died. He was out for a week. Rionette explains that she had been waiting for Rick to wake up because she wants to personally invite him to join her adventuring party, Orichalcum Fist. The goal of the party is to defeat Kaiser Alcipiat, the monster Rick has always dreamed of defeating. Rionette had seen Rick's bravery and determination during the dragon battle, and even though he didn't have the power to win at the time, she believes he has the potential to grow stronger. She thinks Rick can fight alongside the S-rank party and become a true adventurer. Rick is overwhelmed by Rionette's faith in him. It's the first time anyone has supported his dream of becoming an adventurer, and he is moved to tears. With her encouragement, he feels like he can finally pursue his dreams. After recovering from his injuries, Rick takes the E-rank adventurer exam. For the first time in his life, he can proudly say that he is an adventurer. After receiving his exam results, Rick goes to visit Lynx, who is recovering from an earlier battle in the hospital. Lynx congratulates Rick on passing the exam and asks if he's still up for those drinks they had talked about earlier. Rick is happy to spend time with Lynx, but when Lynx mentions visiting Rick's house, Rick's face changes. He tries to talk Lynx out of it, but Lynx insists on coming over. Rick finally gives in and gives him directions, telling him to wear his strongest armor if he wants to survive. At first, Lynx doesn't understand why Rick is so serious about it, but when he arrives at Rick's house, he's shocked. Rick lives in a demon lord's castle. As he approaches the front door and rings the bell, Rick comes out to meet him. The inside of the castle is much nicer than Lynx had imagined. Once they enter, Rick apologizes for making Lynx come all the way out here. Lynx says it's fine, especially since he didn't encounter any monsters on the way. Rick explains that monsters never come near the castle, which makes Lynx wonder why he had to wear armor at all. Rick replies that the armor is for Lynx's protection, but not from monsters. As they enter the mansion, Rionette greets Lynx warmly. Lynx thanks her for her help during the earlier battle. Just then, Elise comes running down the stairs, excited to see Rick. Without thinking, she casts a massive lightning spell aimed directly at Lynx. If the spell had hit, Lynx would have been killed instantly. But Rick is quick enough to swat the spell away, and the only damage is a hole in the wall. Rick scolds Elise for using magic in the castle after he specifically told her not to. Elise, however, complains that she's bored since Rick hasn't played with her in a while. Rionette steps in, saying that Elise will have to pay for the damage out of her food budget. This finally gets Elise to apologize, but Rick knows she'll probably do it again as soon as she's bored. He tells Lynx to go ahead and relax while he deals with Elise. Lynx was like, "Whoa, this place is huge." He looked out the window and saw Mizet, the little dwarf guy, tinkering with some crazy weapon. Lynx walked over and said hi. Mizet was cool and let Lynx try out his weapon. It was like a supercharged laser gun or something. Lynx was blown away. Mizet was just playing around with it, like it was nothing. Then, Lynx stumbled upon Brufston's room. He couldn't believe his eyes, it was a giant library. Brufston, the big ORC, was a total bookworm. He was training Rick, but he still loved reading. Lynx asked if Brufston could train him too, and Brufston was like, "Sure, why not?" Lynx was stoked. He was gonna get trained by a badass ORC. Lynx was getting a crash course in Brufston's brutal training. He'd been pushed off a cliff with weights tied to his ankles, and he was starting to think Brufston was trying to kill him. Rick had warned him, but Lynx hadn't listened. Now he was paying the price. Later, Rick and Lynx were having tea, and Lynx couldn't help but notice how Rick looked at Rionette. It was clear that Rick cared for her deeply. Lynx, being a wise and experienced man, gave Rick some advice. He told him that age was just a number and that he should go for it. Rick was hesitant, but Lynx encouraged him. He said that sometimes, you just have to take a chance. After all, life's too short to let opportunities slip away. Later that evening, things went off the rails, not because anyone messed up, but because Rionette's too damn perfect at everything. She whips up dinner like she's running a 5-star kitchen, and the squad gathers around the table to dig in. Lynx, ever the smooth talker, starts hyping up her cooking like it's some kind of divine gift. Everyone's nodding, shoving food in their faces, and practically begging for seconds. Rionette, being all sunshine and rainbows, gets up to grab refills. As soon as she's out of earshot, Lynx leans over to Rick and throws him a curveball. "Hey, dumbass," he mutters. "Go help her or something. You are supposed to be bonding, not sitting there like a lump." Rick, clueless but eager, jumps up to follow Rionette, ready to awkwardly help and maybe impress her. With Rick gone, Lynx smirks and shifts gears. "Alright, what's the deal with his freaky little, reckless soul power?" Brufston shrugs, saying, "Yeah, that thing only kicks in when it feels like it. Total wild card. Imagine if he could actually turn it on when he needed to instead of waiting for the stars to align." Lynx snorts, "S-rank my ass. The dude's basically a walking nuke when it works, but good luck getting it to fire." Right when Rick and Rionette wander back, looking all innocent, Brufston decides it's time to get serious. He turns to Lynx. "Hey, you've got ties with Central, right? Know anything about those 6 jewels?" Lynx narrows his eyes. "The hell are you talking about?" Brufston explains, "You know, the magic rocks from the Yamto legends. They're the only way to crack open that source spiral thing and deal with Kaiser Alcipiet. Apparently, they light up every 10,000 years, and lucky us, this is their moment to shine." Lynx raises an eyebrow. "I always thought that Yamto crap was just a bunch of bedtime stories. You guys really buying into this?" Brufston nods, dead serious. Lynx groans. "Fine. I'll dig around Central, see if there's anything buried in their classified files. But don't hold your breath, alright?" Brufston, looking like he's ready to shake Lynx's hand, says, "Thanks, man. You are not completely useless." Lynx rolls his eyes, muttering something about being surrounded by idiots. The next day, Rick corners Lynx, looking all desperate. "Yo, got any more of that relationship advice crap?" he mutters, clearly still licking his wounds from whatever disaster he pulled with Rionette. Lynx sighs, already tired of Rick's nonsense. "Yeah, here's a tip, stop being a tryhard. Women hate that." Rick doesn't seem convinced, but Lynx isn't about to hold his hand through life. Later, Lynx finds himself at the Adventurers Guild, bored out of his mind, when he spots some chick mopping the floors. She looks ready to murder someone, clearly pissed she's stuck cleaning instead of killing monsters. Just as she's about to snap her mop in half, she overhears some adventurers arguing about a B-rank quest. Apparently, they need a party of 4, with at least 2 A-rank badass, and they're one short. The guild master's like, just grab whoever's standing around. Guess who's the unlucky bystander? Mop girl. They drag her into their team, and she introduces herself as Ray, looking like she regrets every decision that led to this moment. She eyes the group, an old geezer, a little kid, and an ORC, that's Brufston, obviously. She shrugs and joins, pretending like she doesn't care that her new squad looks like a bad joke. Out on the quest, Elise suddenly freezes. "Something's close," she says, like she's in a damn horror movie. "Race all, what the hell are we looking for?" Rick pipes up, all serious. "A magic stone. It's not for sale, it's way too dangerous." Ray rolls her eyes. "Bet it would fetch a fortune, though." She's clearly unimpressed and starts bragging about how she can handle any monster, even though she's F rank. Rick awkwardly admits he's an E rank, and Ray immediately thinks, wow, what a loser. Then, Elise spots it, a freaking wyvern. Ray's confidence? Gone. She's about to bolt when Brufston strolls up like it's no big deal and smacks the damn thing aside. Doesn't even kill it, just sends it flying to call for backup. Ray's freaking out now, ranting about how a wyvern swarm will kill them all. Brufston's had enough. Rick, get this whiny little brat outta here before I lose it. As Rick leads Ray away, she keeps looking back, expecting a massacre. Instead, she watches Brufston and Ailey absolutely wreck the incoming wyverns, bodies dropping left and right. Just when she thinks things can't get worse, a red wyvern shows up. That's when Ray officially loses it, thinking they're all doomed. But then Rick, yes, loser E-rank Rick, walks up to the red wyvern like he's taking a goddamn stroll. Before she can yell at him for being suicidal, he one-shots the thing with a punch. A punch. Ray's jaw hits the floor. Suddenly, the guy she thought was a joke looks like the scariest dude in the room. One day at the Adventurers Guild, there's this chick, Ray, stuck mopping the damn floors. She's pissed, muttering under her breath about how she should be out there slicing up monsters, not playing maid. As she's slamming the mop around, she overhears some adventurers at the desk trying to grab a B-rank quest. Her ears perk up, and she drags her ass over to see what's up. Turns out, it's Rick and his crew, but the guild master's shooting them down. Sorry, rules are rules, he says. You need 4 people, and at least 2 of them have to be A rank or higher. Rick and the squad don't waste time whining. They're like, alright, find us a 4th, then. The guild master looks around, and guess who's standing there, trying to eavesdrop like a nosy little brat? Ray. The master points her out, and before she can protest, she's getting roped into their squad. She's side-eyeing the group, especially Brufston, the talking ORC, like, what the actual hell is this lineup? But she plays it cool, introduces herself, and decides to roll with it. Fast forward, they're on the road, and Ailey, the kid of the group, suddenly freezes. Something's ahead, she says all cryptic like. Ray's curiosity gets the better of her. What are we even looking for? She asks. Rick chimes in, a magic stone. We got a tip it's around here somewhere. Ray's eyes light up. Magic stone? Bet that thing would sell for a shitload of gold. Rick shuts her down hard. We are not selling it. Stones like that attract monsters and worse if they fall into the wrong hands. Ray snorts. Please, I ain't scared of monsters. I can take anything that comes at us. She puffs up her chest, bragging about how she's gonna skyrocket from F rank to A rank in no time. Then, just to size him up, she asks Rick about his rank. He shrugs. I just got bumped to E rank. Ray holds back a laugh but only barely. This guy? E rank? At his age? What a goddamn loser. Soon, Ailey spots a wyvern, exactly the type of creature they've been looking for. Ray begins to panic, as wyverns are incredibly powerful and dangerous. But to her shock, Brufston walks up to the wyvern and slaps it away like it's nothing. He purposely doesn't kill it, wanting it to call for backup. This makes Ray even more nervous because a wyvern swarm would be almost impossible to survive. Brufston, annoyed by Ray's constant complaining, tells Rick to take her somewhere safe for now. Rick leads Ray out of the forest, and as they walk, Ray expresses her disbelief at Brufston's actions. She can't believe he intentionally attracted the wyverns. Just as she finishes talking, they hear the sound of wyvern corpses crashing to the ground, as Brufston and Ailey are taking down the creatures. Ray is stunned by the sight. As she's processing what just happened, a red wyvern appears, and Ray panics again. Red wyverns are even stronger than regular wyverns, and they're tough enough to challenge even A-rank adventurers. Ray, fearing for her life, suggests they should run, since she's only F-rank and Rick is E-rank. But Rick simply walks up to the red wyvern and, in one punch, blows its head off, killing it instantly. Ray is left speechless, completely amazed by Rick's strength. The next day, Ray is still thinking about everything that happened. She's sitting in the guild when the guild master comes up to her and expresses his relief that she made it out of the situation safely. He tells her that Orchalcum Fist, the team Rick is part of, is the strongest party in the entire continent. All of its members are S-rank adventurers, which is why they were able to handle the wyverns so easily. Ray is inspired by this and decides that she wants to become strong enough to join their ranks one day. Determined, she hands her broom to the guild master, intending to start training immediately. However, the guildmaster isn't thrilled about this decision since sweeping the floors is her actual job. Meanwhile, after returning from their wyvern hunt, Rick and his team manage to retrieve a magic jewel from the wyvern's den. Mizit uses magic to pinpoint the location of the next jewel they need to find, and it's located in Herotopia, a large city known for its coliseums and powerful fighters. Years back, in some sunburnt hellhole mostly made of sand, this absolute unit named King Alexander Herotopia decided to slap together a kingdom and call it Hertopia. Dude didn't stop there, though. He built a massive ass coliseum and threw down the gauntlet, inviting every badass from across the land to come fight. And get this, the guy himself jumped in the ring and wrecked everyone. No losses. Ever. King Alex became the undefeated champ, and the Coliseum made his kingdom blow up in popularity. Now? The guy's a freaking legend, immortalized in statues, stories, and probably some bad tattoos. Bruffston, one of Rick's meathead buddies, pipes up one day like, "Man, I wish I could have fought Alexander. Would have been epic." Bruffston, ever the realist, is like, "Yeah, sure, but..." The guy would have clapped your cheeks so hard Hertopia would have turned back into a desert. Anyway, the squad decides it's time to hit up Hertopia for their next lead on those fancy jewels. Ray's still riding high after watching Bruffston and Rick destroy wyverns and has decided she's gonna train her ass off to stop being a walking L. Meanwhile, the rest of the team preps for whatever chaos is waiting. They roll into Hertopia, where being a fighter is like being a celebrity. The city's buzzing about the upcoming King of Fists tournament. Apparently, it's the event of the year. Bruffston's hyped, ready to throw down, but Rick keeps reminding everyone, "Focus, guys. We are here for the jewel." Problem is, every time they try to talk to someone, the locals take one look at Bruffston, the giant talking ORC, and bolt like they've seen death itself. After striking out for the millionth time, Rick sighs. Let's just hit up the town hall. Someone there's gotta know something. But just as they're about to leave, they spot some punk harassing a girl in the alley. Rick, trying to be a hero, starts walking over, but Bruffston steps in first. The guy harassing the girl doesn't back down, and in the dumbest move of his life, he actually challenges Bruffston to a fight. Bruffston's all smiles. "Oh, a fight? Sure thing, buddy. Let's take this to the alley." Cue about 10 seconds of silence, followed by a loud crack. Bruffston strolls back out dragging the guy's unconscious body like it's a sack of potatoes. Somehow, the dude survived, but he's not the same. Now he's all polite and introduces himself as Gold, acting like a reformed choir boy. "I've turned over a new leaf," he says, while Bruffston just grunts and drops him like yesterday's trash. The girl, Militia, introduces herself too, thanking Bruffston for stepping in. Bruffston, ever the practical one, pulls out the red jewel they've been looking for. "You two seen this before?" Gold scratches his head. "Looks familiar, but I can't place it." Militia nods. "Yeah, I've seen it somewhere," but then a loud-ass parade rolls through, cutting her off. Turns out it's for the King of Fists tournament, and Gold's all hyped, like, "Yo, it's Kevin Wolf. 5-time champ." Militia's swooning, pointing out Kevin's champion belt, which, surprise, surprise, has a jewel that looks just like the one the team's hunting for. Kevin's riding through the streets like he's the second coming, flexing for the crowd. After the parade, he heads to his gym, where the owner's all apologetic about the publicity circus. Kevin just laughs it off. "It's whatever, man, but honestly, I'm bored. Winning every year is too easy. I need someone who can actually give me a challenge." Little does he know, he's about to get more than he bargained for. Rick and Rionette stroll into the gym like they own the place, but before they can even get a word in, Kevin's eyes lock onto them. The champ knows right away these two aren't your average fanboys. The gym owner, trying to act all tough, is like, "Yo, you can't just barge in here uninvited." Rick cuts him off with, "Relax, Gramps. We are not here to gawk at your boy." He explains they're adventurers looking for a gem, but before he can get all sentimental about it, Bruffston steps in and drops the bomb, "I want the damn belt." The gym owner's face twists, and he's ready to call security. "Thieves, huh? Think you're gonna waltz in here and snatch the champ's belt?" Bruffston just stares him down, his voice like gravel, "We don't want the belt, old man. Just the jewel on it. It belonged to someone from our crew. We'll even replace it for you. No harm, no foul." Kevin, leaning against the wall, raises a hand to stop the drama. "Chill," he says, his eyes narrowing. The ORC's telling the truth. "But here's the deal, big guy, you want the jewel? You gotta earn it. That belt isn't just some bling, it's the pride of Herotopia. You want it? Beat me in the King of Fists tournament." Brufston doesn't even flinch. "Fine by me," he says, turning to leave. Rick, frustrated, hisses, "That's it? You are just walking out?" Brufston shrugs like it's no big deal. "I win the tournament, I get the belt, I get the jewel. Simple." They leave the gym, and the owners left sweating bullets, realizing that trying to force them out might have ended with the whole damn building leveled. Kevin, smirking, says, "That ORC? He's hiding some real scary shit. And the quiet one? Rick? Don't let that chill attitude fool you. The guy's built like a tank under that shirt." Outside, Brufston lays out the game plan. "Here's how it goes. We all enter the tournament, but the prelims are split between the east and west gates. You two," he says, pointing at Rick and Rionette, "head to the west. I'll handle the east. That way, we don't end up knocking each other out in the early rounds." Rick raises an eyebrow. "You sure you'll be good on your own? You are not exactly blending in, big guy." Brufston just smirks. "Already handled it. Gold's gonna be my guide. He owes me after I knocked the attitude out of his skull." Rionette nods. "All right, let's do it. But don't get too comfy." Brufston laughs, a deep, rumbling sound. "Looking forward to it." And just like that, the squad splits up, each of them gearing up to wreck anyone who gets in their way. The King of Fists tournament isn't ready for what's about to hit it, an ORC with the strength of a god, a swordsman with a power no one sees coming, and a healer who's way too good at breaking bones when she's pissed. All eyes might be on the champion, but Herotopia's about to learn what happens when adventurers crash the party. After a long day of training and preparation, Rick and Rionette congratulate Angelica for winning her 10th match, which qualifies her to enter the preliminaries for the King of Fists tournament. Angelica's accomplishment motivates Rick even more to push himself in his own matches. However, Angelica is still perplexed by Rick's goal of completing 100 matches in just 10 days. To her, it seems almost impossible. Rick, on the other hand, doesn't understand why it's such a big deal. Angelica points out the main challenge: you can only register for one match per day at each venue. While Herotopia has more than 100 venues, some are extremely remote, situated as far as 1,000 kilometers away from other venues. Traveling between venues in such a short amount of time and managing to complete 100 matches seems like an incredibly difficult task. Despite this, Rick remains confident, saying that he will figure it out. Before Rick can continue his plans, he and Rionette need to take a test, similar to a promotion exam at the Adventurers Guild. When Rick enters the arena for his test, the examiner explains that he will be facing a mock battle to assess his strength. His opponent will be one of the newly recruited fighters, someone who has won every match so far. However, regardless of whether Rick wins or loses, as long as he meets certain criteria, he will still pass the exam. The doors of the arena swing open, and a confident voice rings out. The fighter entering introduces herself as The Flash, boasting about her incredible speed and warning her next opponent to watch out. However, her confidence falters as soon as she spots Rick, and she's taken aback. It's none other than Angelica, who Rick recognizes from their previous encounters. She's surprised to see him here and wonders why he's participating in the test, though she also realizes that it's bad luck for her to be facing him in a mock battle. Despite the fact that losing doesn't really have any consequences, Angelica is determined to maintain her undefeated streak. She decides to go all out and attempt to overwhelm Rick with her speed. But as soon as she charges, she trips and falls flat on the ground. She assumes it's just nerves, but when it happens again, she realizes it's not her nerves, it's Rick doing something. Looking up at Rick, she's confused, and he calmly explains that he's been practicing a new skill over the last few months. Rick, the cocky bastard, couldn't help but show off his latest trick, something he called the 8 secret arts of going easy. Sounds fancy, right? Nah, it's just him sweeping people's legs like a damn show-off. first move? Constantly tripping Angelica up, making her eat dirt over and over. She's pissed as hell, calling it insulting, but Rick just shrugs, like, bruh, you ain't even hurt. Chill. He's doing it so fast that even Angelica, with all her speed and pride, can't do jack about it. She tries to back up, keep her distance, but nope, her ass is back on the ground again. Angelica's fuming, but she ain't giving up. Rick, the smug jerk, smirks and goes, fine, guess I'll actually fight you for real now. But the second he says that, Angelica just throws in the towel. She's had enough of his BS. Rick looks kinda let down, but also like, whatever, I'm still the man. He's already hyped to go sign up for the tournament prelims. Just as he's about to bounce, Angelica storms up to him, bowling like a kid who lost their candy. Why do you always gotta beat me so damn easily? It's not fair. Rick, thinking Rionette might roll up and catch the wrong vibe, is like, yo, chill. Let's grab some food or something. Talk it out. They hit up a restaurant nearby, which, surprise surprise, is owned by Militia's parents. Militia's there too, giving them the royal treatment, smiling like a little angel. While they're munching, Militia starts blushing like a schoolgirl and admits she's got a thing for Bruffston. Rick's like, well, hate to break it to you, but my guy's registering over on the east side, so you're not gonna see him anytime soon. Militia looks crushed but bounces, leaving Rick, Rionette, and Angelica to keep talking. Angelica's still grilling Rick. Why the hell are you even in Herotopia? You are already crazy strong, what's the point? Rick, nonchalant as ever, goes, I'm gonna win the tournament. Angelica's jaw practically hits the floor. You are joking, right? You do realize qualifying is hell, don't you? She breaks it down, 10 wins just to enter the prelims, and most fighters only manage, like, 2 wins a month. Rick just smirks and drops the bombshell, I've scheduled 100 matches a day for the next 10 days. Angelica's about to lose her mind. Next day, Rick struts into the arena for his first match. His opponent? Some sketchy dude named Grit. The coordinator warns Rick, yo, this guy's dirty, might be hiding a weapon. Watch your back. Rick takes one look at Grit and shrugs it off. Easy win, he thinks. Match starts, and bam, Grit pulls out some illegal crap called an impact stone from his shoe. Dude punches with enough force to wreck boulders. Crowds gasping, a dust cloud explodes, and everyone thinks Rick's toast. But when the dust clears, Rick's standing there without a scratch, and Grit's elbows are wrecked. The guy's screaming like, what the hell? Rick, as usual, had gone easy on him, knocking him out with just the air pressure from a missed punch. The crowd loses their minds. Rick walks off like it's just another Tuesday. Later, Rick and Rionette head to watch Angelica fight. She earns her nickname, The Flash, by absolutely demolishing her opponent, kicking the poor guy into a wall like a rag doll. She starts gloating, but Rick cuts her off. Yeah, cool story, but I gotta bounce. Green Hill Venue's calling. Angelica laughs in his face. You are an idiot. That's 1,000 kilometers away. You'll never make it in time. Rick just smirks. Who said anything about a carriage? I'm running. Angelica thinks Rick is crazy for attempting to run such a long distance, but the moment Rick starts running, he disappears in a cloud of dust. She's shocked by his speed and realizes that she's no longer the fastest person around. As Rick speeds off, Angelica feels that she doesn't deserve her title of The Flash anymore. While she's still reeling from this realization, Rionette asks Angelica if she would like to watch Rick's match. Angelica says she would love to, but she knows there's no way she could catch up to Rick. Rionette offers to take her there instead, but Angelica is reluctant. She doesn't have a good feeling about it. Before Angelica can say anything, Rionette picks her up and starts jumping from rooftop to rooftop at high speed. Angelica is terrified and pleads for Rionette to go back to the ground, but Rionette doesn't want to take the roads because they're too complicated. Eventually, they make it to the arena, but Angelica is so dizzy from the ride that she misses the entire match. Rick, on the other hand, says he didn't do as well as he hoped because he still needs to practice making his attacks non-lethal. However, he has no time to worry about it now because he has to rush to his next match. Angelica is exhausted and doesn't want to go through the terrifying experience of being carried by Rionette again, but Rionette already grabs her and starts jumping across town. Over the next few days, Rick keeps winning his matches with ease, while Angelica suffers from severe motion sickness from all the roof hopping. Finally, after 4 days, Rick has qualified for the preliminaries by winning all his matches, and the next step is the league. Angelica is relieved that she won't be in the same bracket as Rick, meaning she won't have to fight him for now. Rionette asks if Angelica is hoping to win the tournament. Angelica admits that she would have liked to, but now, with Rick in the tournament, her chances of winning are slim to none. On top of that, Braun, Rick's mentor, is also participating. Though Angelica has never met Braun, she knows that if he trained Rick, Braun must be an even stronger fighter. Still, Angelica decides to compete, even though winning seems impossible. She hopes that by participating, she can deal with a certain person who's been bothering her. Rionette asks who this person is, but Angelica doesn't want to explain, so she changes the subject and asks where Rick is. Rionette casually mentions that Rick went on a 100 km jog, and Angelica, no longer shocked by Rick's absurdity, asks how Rionette can keep up with him. Rionette says she enjoys it and doesn't mind being with Rick. Angelica points out that people are probably going to start rumors that she and Rick are a couple, but Rionette just casually says that she wouldn't mind such rumors, since she has feelings for Rick. Angelica is stunned by Rionette's honesty, but before she can respond, a man approaches them. He asks the two beautiful ladies if they are available for work, and Angelica assumes he's hitting on them. However, it turns out that he's desperate for part-time workers because his business is short-staffed. Later that day, Rick returns from his jog and is approached by Snape, the chairman of the West League. Snape tells Rick that he's heard a lot about him, since Rick is now famous for being the fastest person to qualify for the tournament. Rick shakes Snape's hand, and while they're talking, Snape's guard comes over and informs him that Angelica isn't around. Snape seems disappointed and explains that he's close to Angelica, though he's just a merchant with connections to her family. Rick then asks Snape when he retired from being a fighter. Snape is surprised that Rick knows he used to be a fighter, but Rick explains that he could tell from the handshake that Snape's hands were those of a trained fighter. Snape admits that he once won a small tournament and remembers the feeling of the crowd cheering, but that was years ago. He's long since retired from fighting. Still, he's excited about the tournament and his company is sending a fighter this year. Snape tells Rick that he has other business to attend to, so their conversation will have to be cut short. Before leaving, Snape asks Rick to tell Angelica that he came looking for her, and he also tells Rick to remind Angelica to take care of her health. After Snape leaves, Rick goes inside the bar, where Militia approaches him. She asks if everything is okay because she saw him talking to Snape. While Militia is glad nothing happened, she warns Rick to be cautious. There are rumors that Snape is involved in the criminal underworld, and Rick is surprised to hear this. After all, Snape is well connected with Angelica's family. Militia also mentions that Snape's company became the major sponsor for the tournament, and as the sponsor, Snape has a free slot to send one fighter of his choice to the tournament. Rick overhears some guys in the bar talking about the pretty bunny girls outside. When they mention a dark elf bunny girl, he gets the feeling he's going to want to see this. We cut to the front of the West League Stadium, where Angelica and Rionette are volunteering as bunny girls to help with advertising. Angelica is really putting effort into it, but it's not because she wants to. She just couldn't turn down the man's request when he asked so desperately. Rionette says the only reason she's doing it is because Angelica agreed to join her. The job isn't too bad, but there are always drunk people who won't stop bothering them. One of the guys seems to really enjoy annoying the bunny girls until they leave, and when he tries to grab Angelica's chest, she's not impressed. There's not much to grab, and she ends up beating him up badly. As she's stomping on his head in anger, Rick walks up and is shocked to see Angelica in the bunny outfit. Angelica feels embarrassed and tries to explain that she's only doing it to help, but Rick barely listens as he spots Rionette. The chemistry between Rick and Rionette is obvious, and sparks seem to fly. Angelica, on the other hand, just stands there awkwardly in the middle of it all. Meanwhile, Kervin's coach is reading the newspaper and sees an article about Braun, who completed all his qualification matches in just 2 days. Kervin comments that Rick seems tame compared to Braun, but he still finished all his matches in 10 days, so he's looking forward to this year's fight. The coach remembers the first time he met Kervin, in a rundown city. He had gone there to scout new talent and found Kervin after he had defeated an entire gang that had been after him. At that time, Kervin was known as the Hungry Wolf of the Slums, and he asked the coach if he was here to take him down. But instead, the coach offered Kervin an incredible opportunity to fight for Utopia and earn anything he wanted by winning. He also promised Kervin would face plenty of strong opponents to keep him busy. This offer excited Kervin, and he agreed to join. Now, he's eager for the upcoming fights. The next day, the league matches are about to start, and only one fighter from each block will be able to advance to the tournament. It's going to be a tough competition. The first fight in Block A is between Angelica and a fighter named Helen. From the start of the fight, Angelica seems to be struggling more than usual. She eventually wins by kicking Helen into the wall, but she's clearly exhausted and starting to lose energy. Next is Rick's match. His opponent starts charging up a special move, but Rick easily chops him across the neck, knocking him out in seconds. The rest of the matches follow the same pattern. Angelica wins, but with difficulty, and Rick easily defeats his opponents without breaking a sweat. Angelica is having a rough time, but she's managing to win. However, if she wants to make it to the tournament, she can't afford to lose any more matches. Rick encourages her to keep pushing forward, but before he can offer advice, Angelica walks away, not wanting to hear any more. Angelica's next match is against a fighter who's much stronger and tougher. While she's faster than him, her attacks don't have much effect. To try to gain an advantage, Angelica uses magic to trap him in a water prison and then fires a bolt of lightning into it. But the big guy isn't even phased. He mocks Angelica, telling her that she can't take him down and asking if she's running out of stamina. Angelica tries to use Blink Step to dash in for another attack, but she's too exhausted to keep up, and the large opponent easily outspeeds her. He knocks her out with a powerful blow. After the match, Angelica is treated with healing magic in the infirmary. As she leaves, Rick is waiting for her outside, concerned about how she's feeling. Angelica doesn't want to talk, but Rick points out that she was rushing into the fight too much. He agrees that her opponent had great defenses, so it was a tough matchup from the start, but she could have still won if she had switched tactics and saved her energy instead of draining herself with ineffective moves. Angelica doesn't want to hear this advice, but Rick follows her, determined to get her to talk if something is bothering her. Eventually, Angelica gives in and agrees to explain her situation to Rick. She begins by telling him about the tragic death of her parents, which left her and her siblings in charge of the dire mute estate. Since they were still children at the time, they couldn't manage things properly, and the family quickly fell into financial ruin. To save the family from further disaster, their grandfather made a deal with a man named Snape. In exchange for significant financial support, Snape demanded that Angelica be engaged to him. This arrangement was supposed to give Snape a connection to the nobility. Angelica tells Rick that, although she hated the situation, she couldn't escape it. She felt trapped by the obligations and the deal her grandfather had made. After Angelica's parents passed away, she and her siblings worked tirelessly to restore the dire mute family's fortune, hoping to avoid being controlled by Snape. But by the time they started making progress, it was too late to break off her engagement to Snape. Angelica's situation was complicated, and while Rick felt sympathy for her, he couldn't shake the fact that she was engaged. Determined to free herself from this unwanted marriage, Angelica began investigating Snape to uncover any dirt that would allow her to cancel the engagement. However, instead of finding something to use against him, she discovered that Snape had become a sponsor for the current tournament. As a sponsor, he was allowed to insert one fighter of his choosing into the competition, which gave him considerable power over the event. One day, as Rick, Angelica, and Rinette are in a nearby bar, they hear some commotion. Curious, they head over to see what's going on. They find the man who defeated Angelica earlier in a confrontation with a lizard man. The lizard man is holding a waitress by the neck, and the man is trying to get him to let her go. When the lizard man refuses, the man punches him, but his strike doesn't affect the lizard man, who easily knocks him out. Afterward, the lizard man mocks the man, calling him weak, and returns to harassing the waitress. Angelica can't just stand by, so she runs up and demands the lizard man stop. She knows she's no match for him, but she can't let him get away with it. As the lizard man prepares to strike her, Rick suddenly appears and grabs the lizard man's arm, stopping him. Before the situation escalates further, Snape arrives and tells his younger brother, the lizard man, to calm down and leave. G, the lizard man, listens to Snape and walks away. Snape apologizes for the trouble, explaining that G has anger issues, but he listens to Snape when told to calm down. After Snape leaves, Angelica explains to Rick and Rinette that Snape invested a lot of money into their engagement deal, so he became a sponsor of the tournament to recover some of that money. To do so, Snape plans to exploit the gambling rings surrounding the tournament and use his sponsored fighter to rig the results, ensuring that he wins a significant amount of money. This is why Angelica entered the tournament in the first place, to defeat Snape's fighter and force him to call off the engagement. However, Angelica is well aware that she has no chance of defeating G, the fighter Snape has chosen. Rick thinks for a moment before offering to train her. Angelica is hesitant because she knows how intense Rick's training can be, and it sounds like a death sentence to her. Nevertheless, she agrees, desperate to get stronger. Rick warns her that his training will be extremely difficult, beyond what she can imagine. He straps over 100 kilograms of weight to her and tells her not to mess up the physical enhancement magic, or it could kill her. When Angelica asks what kind of training this is, Rick doesn't explain, instead attaching a rope to himself and taking off running. Angelica is dragged along behind him and begins to regret her decision. Rick explains that the training is called baby bird running, where a slower person is dragged by someone faster, forcing their body to adapt or risk failure. Rick notes that Angelica is good at acceleration, but her overall movements are unstable. This training will help her improve her speed and stability. After running for a while, Angelica asks for a break to mentally prepare herself, but Rick refuses. He says they need to push beyond their limits, so they continue for another 10 hours. By the end of the session, Angelica is barely conscious, unable to believe her legs are still functioning. Despite her exhaustion, Rick praises her for doing better than he did when he first trained with Rinette. Rick admits that he passed out during his first training session and was dragged across the floor, dying 3 times that day. However, Angelica made it through the training relatively unharmed. This was only the morning session, though, and after a 1-hour break, Rick prepares to start the afternoon session. Angelica, shocked at the idea of more training, tries to plead for a lighter schedule, but Rick refuses to listen and tells her he'll be back in an hour. After days of this grueling training, Angelica finds herself in a random bar, far away from the training grounds. She tries to convince herself that running away wasn't out of laziness but out of necessity for her mental health. Rick's training had become torture, and she needed a break. She figures there's no way Rick will find her here, but just as she thinks she's safe, Rick shows up outside the window. He says he's been searching for her all over the kingdom, though Angelica is baffled at how he found her so quickly. It has only been a few minutes since she ran away. She expects Rick to scold her for abandoning the training, but to her surprise, he doesn't. Instead, he calmly tells her that he's glad she's taking a break, and he didn't come to punish her. Rick simply reminds her that if she wants to get stronger, she has to keep pushing through the difficult training. Angelica feels torn between frustration and gratitude for Rick's persistence, but she knows deep down that her only chance to defeat Snape's fighter and break free from the engagement is to become stronger. Despite how unbearable the training is, she resolves to stick with it because the stakes are too high. Rick understands the feeling of wanting to run away. He remembers all the times he tried to escape from training, not to mention the countless times he died. He recalls a specific incident when Bron accidentally killed him during training. To help, Elise lent Bron some of her magic, which allowed Bron to bring Rick back to life. Bron then mentioned that he could probably revive Rick up to 10 more times and wanted to get back to training right away. Angelica is surprised that Rick managed to survive such an intense experience, but Rick explains that although he wanted to quit many times, Bron told him something that changed his mind. Bron said the regret of quitting would be much worse than the suffering he was going through. That idea pushed Rick to keep going, and knowing that he could quit whenever he truly wanted made the training bearable. Angelica listens to Rick's story and opens up about her own feelings. She shares how she has always hated the customs of nobility. She was taught all the noble etiquette and rules, but she never understood why she needed so many different sets of spoons for a single meal. She doesn't want to live her life as a typical noblewoman. Instead, she wants to contribute to her family as the first ever special grade female knight. She is willing to endure any amount of suffering to achieve this goal. Rick is pleased to hear this determination in her voice, and they head outside to continue their training. Rick has been thinking about something. Since Angelica is a knight, she should be able to fight better with a sword. However, the tournament rules only allow fighters to use their bodies in combat, no weapons allowed. Rick suggests that Angelica learn a technique that would allow her hand to be as sharp as a blade. Angelica is surprised to learn such a technique exists, but since this isn't Rick's area of expertise, he calls Rinette over to help train her. By the time Angelica's next match arrives, she looks completely exhausted from the brutal training with Rinette. Her appearance has changed so much that her fans are confused about what happened to her. Her opponent in this match is a large, muscular man, and Angelica realizes that her usual fighting style of striking rapidly will not work on him. Despite the difficult training, Angelica has developed a new fighting style, one where she focuses on landing powerful punches that end the match immediately. She punches the man with so much force that he's knocked out in one hit, and Angelica is declared the winner. The training has clearly paid off, but afterward, it takes a lot to calm her down. Later, Angelica is still shaken by the match, barely able to remember what happened during the fight. Rick reassures her, telling her it doesn't matter because she won and is now qualified for the tournament. Just then, Elise and Mazette arrive at the bar. Rick greets them and asks if the tip they were following led them to one of the jewels they were looking for, but unfortunately, it was a false rumor. Mazette, however, notices a cute girl nearby and tries to flirt with her, but she quickly spins away, revealing she already has a crush on someone. Her crush arrives shortly after, and it's none other than Gold, who announces Braun's return. They all sit down to eat together, and Mazette asks what Braun has been up to lately. Braun explains that he and Rick are entering the tournament, hoping to win and claim one of the jewels as their prize. Elise then says she also wants to enter the tournament, but Rick knows that if she did, she'd destroy the entire kingdom. Braun, noticing Angelica, calls her over and mentions that he heard she's participating in the tournament as well. Angelica confirms it and shares that she asked Rick and Rinette to train her. She admits that their training nearly killed her many times, but Rick reassures her that the fact that she survived proves she has talent. Despite this, Angelica worries that she doesn't have enough time to get strong enough to win the tournament. Braun and Mazette encourage her to have more faith in her efforts. They remind her that hard work always yields good results, so she should trust in the progress she's made so far. Finally, the day of the tournament arrives, and the match pairings are revealed. Rick is relieved to see that he won't have to face Braun anytime soon, because if that happened, he'd just withdraw from the tournament. Angelica points out, however, that the tournament brackets seem rigged to favor G. According to the setup, G won't have to fight Braun or Kevin until the final round, which gives him a clear advantage. The way the tournament brackets were set up was likely to favor G, and Angelica quickly figured out why. Braun and Kevin were seen as major obstacles for G, and if the plan was to have G win every match, Snape probably wanted to impress the crowd with G's strength by having him fight weaker opponents. Once G built up enough hype and people started betting on him, Snape could place a bet against G, causing G to lose a round on purpose. This would create an illusion that G wasn't trying his hardest, making him look like he was barely breaking a sweat against his opponents. The goal was to manipulate the situation so that G's victories seemed impressive, even though they weren't truly earned. Angelica, however, wanted to spoil this plan by facing G early in the tournament and ruining the hype around him. She knew that if she could knock G out early, it would throw a wrench in Snape's plan. Angelica's strategy worked out perfectly with the way the brackets were set up, but Rick raised a good point. What would she do if she couldn't face G until the finals? Angelica hadn't even considered that possibility. But since things worked out in her favor, there was no reason to dwell on what could have gone wrong. Meanwhile, G, feeling bored with the whole tournament, was uninterested in most of the action. While Rick and Braun were heading to the stands, they ran into Kevin, who congratulated them on making it to the tournament. Braun, always confident, told Kevin he was going to take the championship belt from him. Kevin responded with excitement, eager to finally have a real fight again. This was a flashback to when Kevin had first started training. He had joined a gym that wasn't very well known at the time but had fighters who managed to make it to the semi-finals of the tournament. Kevin was eager to prove himself, and when he first stepped into the ring, he asked if he could kill his opponent. The coach quickly reminded him that killing was against the rules, and that only fists were allowed, no weapons or armor. Kevin, unbothered, told his opponent not to hold it against him if he got hurt. But by the end of the fight, it was Kevin who was badly hurt. The coach wasn't surprised that Kevin lost but noted that he had some natural talent for someone who had never trained properly. He encouraged Kevin to continue training, promising that with the right guidance, Kevin could become one of the best fighters in Utopia. Over the years, Kevin worked hard, and through his dedication and numerous defeats, he eventually became the champion of the tournament. Now, years later, Kevin still had that same fiery excitement in his eyes. Back to the tournament, the first round was starting, and G was about to face off against a man named Herman. G, still bored, didn't take the match seriously, which irritated Herman. He charged forward, attempting to knock G out, but his attack did no damage. Annoyed, G swung a punch at Herman but missed, hitting the floor instead. The resulting dust cloud was so thick that even G couldn't see, which led to him accidentally striking Herman and knocking him out of the ring. G's goal was achieved. He had created an impression that he was unbeatable, but Rick thought it was strange. Despite G's immense power, he moved like an amateur, showing no signs of formal training. The rest of the matches played out as expected, with Angelica, Rick, and Braun all winning their respective rounds. The final match of the day was between Kevin and a random opponent. Rick and Braun were curious to see what Kevin could do, so they watched carefully. Kevin's opponent tried to attack, but Kevin knocked him to the ground before the opponent could even finish his move. It wasn't that Kevin had faster reaction times, rather, he had trained his senses to detect his opponent's impulses before they even made a move. It was like he could smell his opponent's intentions in advance. However, to everyone's surprise, Kevin let himself be hit a moment later. It wasn't that he failed to react, it looked like he intentionally allowed the punch to land to make the fight more dramatic. But Kevin quickly recovered and finished the fight with a single punch. The next day, the semifinals were set, and Angelica was about to face G in her biggest test yet. Snape, ever the strategist, came over to Rick to ask if he could sit with them, which Rick had no problem with. Snape explained that he wasn't sitting in his designated sponsor seat because he wanted to be as close as possible to the action. The match, after all, involved his younger brother and his future bride. As Angelica walked through the stadium corridor, she crossed paths with G. She stepped up to him and told him that she would be his opponent today. G didn't remember her at first but soon recognized her as the girl Snape was marrying. He sarcastically mentioned that Snape had asked him not to mess up her face too badly so they wouldn't have to edit the wedding photos. Angelica, unamused, retorted that she would show G the results of all her hard work. G, however, wasn't impressed. He believed that hard work was meaningless. He had never trained a day in his life and was still much stronger than Angelica. He scoffed at the idea that her efforts could ever change the fact that she was weak compared to him. When the match began, Angelica tried attacking G, but her kicks barely made an impact. Realizing that she couldn't hurt him with regular attacks, Angelica backed away, deciding to put her training to good use. She focused her mana, circulating it within her body, and then charged forward with renewed strength. With one well-placed strike, she managed to make a small cut on G's body. Angelica's chance to win wasn't over yet. Despite how powerful G was, she had managed to injure him slightly with a technique that seemed impossible to use on someone as tough as G. Snape, who was watching from the stands, was shocked. Normally, even the sharpest weapons wouldn't be able to cut through G's armor, so how had Angelica managed to make a small cut on him? Rick explained that Angelica was using a special technique that she had been learning from Rinette, a technique that relied on perfect body control rather than magic or weapons. Rinette had demonstrated the technique early in Angelica's training by slicing a boulder in half with just her hand, a feat that Angelica had never imagined could be possible. At first, Angelica had doubts about whether she could ever learn such a powerful skill. But Rick encouraged her, reminding her that even he had been able to learn it, though not as well as Rinette. The key to the technique was learning to feel the air around her, and with enough practice, Angelica had started to master it. She used her magic to channel this technique into a single, powerful blow, a move she had never thought possible before. With this new technique, Angelica was able to injure G and prove that all her hard work had paid off. However, despite this, she wasn't guaranteed to win. G still had the upper hand in strength, and he wasn't going to hold back. As the fight continued, G grew increasingly irritated with Angelica's persistence. He punched the ground, creating a cloud of dust to obscure Angelica's vision. In the confusion, he tried to knock her out, but Angelica was quick enough to dodge. She had learned to be ready for that move, and she darted around the arena, landing several slashes on G. Snape, who was watching intently, wasn't frustrated because he thought Angelica might win. He knew she couldn't defeat G, but he was frustrated because he understood exactly what G was planning. G wasn't just playing around anymore, he was serious and no longer taking it easy on Angelica. He once again punched the ground to create a dust cloud, but this time, he didn't give Angelica any time to recover. He appeared behind her and smacked her into the wall. G had been told by Snape not to hurt Angelica too much, but her persistence had started to get under his skin. At first, he'd been willing to hold back for Snape's sake, but now, he was done with that. Angelica, still determined, tried to use her flickering feet technique to get close to G and attack him, but G copied her technique perfectly and outsped her, knocking her into the wall once again. Snape, watching this unfold, knew this was going to happen. He explained to Rick that G was his adoptive brother and that their history went way back. G had beaten Snape so thoroughly in a sparring match when G was very young that Snape realized he wasn't cut out for fighting anymore. He retired after that match because he realized how far G outclassed him. G's natural talent for combat was unmatched. Even though G had never formally trained, his raw strength and fighting instincts made him stronger than any fighter Snape had ever seen. Angelica, despite her efforts and hard work, could never overcome G's inherent skill. Snape wasn't rigging the matches or setting up G to win, he was just confident that G would come out on top. As a result, Snape had placed large bets on G to win the tournament, knowing he was the favorite to win. However, G wasn't concerned about the tournament anymore. At this point, he was just taking out his frustration on Angelica, showing her that all her hard work was pointless compared to his natural talent. He grabbed Angelica, holding her up as he mocked her efforts. He asked if she had finally accepted that she was just untalented trash. Angelica, despite everything, didn't give up. She threw one last punch at him, but it was weak and had no effect. This infuriated G even more, and he decided to ignore the tournament rules and kill Angelica. Rick, watching from the sidelines, couldn't stay quiet anymore. He yelled at G to stop, reminding him that he had already won the match. But G didn't care about the rules or the tournament anymore. He charged at Angelica with murderous intent, ready to finish what he started. Just as G was about to strike a fatal blow, a boot suddenly flew through the air and knocked G's claws out of the way. The boot belonged to Rick, and he had never been more angry in his life. Rick didn't usually get angry, but seeing G about to kill Angelica pushed him to his breaking point. After the match ended, Rick stormed backstage, where G was waiting for him, furious. G threw his boot at Rick and confronted him, angry that Rick had interrupted his moment. G threatened to make Rick pay for stopping him, but Rick remained silent. His lack of response only made G more irritated, and he tried to kick Rick, but Rick was too quick. In an instant, Rick appeared behind G and calmly put his boot back on, saying nothing. He could have gotten revenge on G right then and there, but he knew that wouldn't be right. Rick made it clear that he wouldn't fight G in anger, but he would make G pay for his actions when they faced each other in the tournament. Rick then walked away, leaving G seething with rage, eager for their match the next day. The next round of matches began, and Rick, still angry from the earlier events, forgot to hold back against his opponent. He defeated him easily, leaving his opponent no chance to fight back. With this win, Rick was now advancing to the semi-finals, but his mind was still on Angelica. After the match, Rick went to check on Angelica. He found out from the nurse that Angelica had sustained severe injuries, and it would take longer than usual for her to recover. However, there was no immediate risk to her life, which was a relief for Rick. He was grateful she was okay but felt sorry for her. She had trained so hard to get stronger, only for things to end this way. Meanwhile, Braun and Kervin had also won their matches, and the finalists for the semifinals had been decided. With all the excitement building up, Rick knew that the upcoming rounds would be even more intense. The tournament was far from over, but it had already become clear that Angelica's determination and strength had made her a force to be reckoned with, even if she wasn't able to win this fight. The following day, Rick finds Angelica walking through the halls and is relieved to see that she's doing much better, thanks to Bronson's healing. Still, he reminds her not to overdo it. He doesn't want to discuss what happened in her last match, so he turns to leave. However, before he walks away, Angelica stops him and apologizes. She feels like she let him down. She believes that despite all the effort Rick put into training her, she failed to live up to his expectations. She wonders if maybe she's just not cut out to be a fighter after all. Rick reassures her that she has nothing to apologize for. He explains that she worked incredibly hard, and he's proud of her progress. The real problem, he says, is that he underestimated Gia's strength. Rick admits he failed to prepare Angelica properly for such a powerful opponent. He encourages her to watch his upcoming fight with Geet closely, not just to see him win, but to show her what can be achieved with hard work and dedication. The time for Rick's match arrives, and he faces off against G, who surprises Rick by expressing concern about Angelica. At first, Rick thinks G might be feeling some remorse for his actions, but then G turns it into a cruel comment. He says he feels sorry for Angelica because she has to live with the knowledge that she will never be as strong as he is. Rick charges toward G and lands the first punch. To his surprise, G drops to his knees in shock. Rick mocks him, calling out how a single punch from him knocked G down when G had boasted about being stronger than Rick. G quickly recovers and charges at Rick, but Rick easily dodges the attack and delivers a powerful palm strike that knocks the air out of G. Angelica watches in amazement, thinking that Rick must be using his superhuman strength to hurt G. However, Rinette corrects her, explaining that Rick isn't relying on raw strength at all. Instead, he's using a technique called Through Body, which targets the core of the body and ignores armor. This technique allows Rick to deal damage to G no matter how tough his exterior is. Rick offers G a chance to withdraw from the fight, but G, still confident in his superiority, activates his Dragonite magic, enhancing his strength and speed. With his newfound power, G knocks Rick back. Rick quickly regains his balance and starts running around to evade Gia's attacks, trying to avoid getting caught by Gia's new strength. From the sidelines, Roston begins to realize Rick's strategy. He recognizes that Gia's magic requires a lot of energy to maintain. Gia's magical reserves are enormous, and he never had to train his mana capacity because he was born with such an abundant supply. However, Rick knows this and is using it to his advantage. He attacks again, but Gia's reinforced body is much harder to damage now. G retaliates by slashing and kicking Rick away. Rick is unfazed. While G looks tired from using so much magic, Rick still has no injuries. Rick is using a technique called Flowing Strikes, which allows him to absorb and disperse the damage from Gia's attacks. It's as if the damage never reaches him, and he remains unharmed. Frustrated, G grows angrier. He can't understand why Rick isn't getting hurt. Rick calmly explains that he's holding back. He's intentionally limiting himself to match Angelica's strength in order to show her how far hard work can take you. He's using nothing but Angelica's full power in this fight, and he's going to defeat G with it. G, humiliated and furious, promises Rick that he will regret underestimating him. He prepares for an all-out attack, but because he's exhausted from using so much magic, he starts to lose control. Rick takes advantage of this weakness and punches through Gia's defenses, landing a powerful blow. G is stunned. He can't comprehend how he's losing to someone who is using Angelica's strength, which is far below his own. He's never experienced real exhaustion before, and his body can't handle the strain. Rick's careful training and experience have allowed him to push through his limits and keep fighting even when exhausted. This is something G can't understand. Snape, watching from the sidelines, is in shock. He had assumed G would easily win, but Rick is winning with nothing more than hard work. He asks if Rick has more natural talent than G, but the others quickly clarify that Rick has almost no talent at all. His strength comes from years of dedication and perseverance, something G could never understand. Rick's true strength lies in his ability to push beyond the limits of normal people, while G has only relied on his innate abilities and never learned to train past his initial potential. Rick continues to dodge and counter G's attacks. Finally, G tries one last punch, but Rick catches it and sends a wave of force through G's arm. Rick acknowledges that G is an incredible prodigy, but he's still only beginning his journey. True strength doesn't come from raw talent alone, it comes from pushing yourself past the limits, from training to the point of exhaustion, from constantly improving. Rick assures G that his natural gifts will only take him so far. Without the discipline to train beyond his limits, G will never reach his full potential. G, unable to accept this, decides to use his ultimate power. He calls upon his ancient dragon blood, transforming into a more powerful dragon-like form. Now stronger, more durable, and faster than before, G starts overpowering Rick once again. His attacks become more difficult to dodge, and Rick begins to struggle against GS' new form. Rick tries to use his through body attack again, but it has no effect on GS' new dragon form. GS' body is now far more resilient, and his speed has increased, making it even harder for Rick to keep up. The fight has turned into a brutal struggle, and for the first time, Rick is having trouble keeping up with GS' overwhelming power. In this moment, Rick realizes that to defeat G, he will need to find another way to outsmart him. Despite the immense strength G now has, Rick knows that talent alone won't win the fight. It's the strategy, experience, and understanding of one's limits that will determine the true victor. Rick realizes that Angelica, with her current abilities, stands no chance against GS' overwhelming power. However, he assures her that this doesn't mean she'll never be able to beat him. With rigorous training, Angelica could one day surpass even GS' natural talents. Rick outlines the possibilities. Within months, Angelica's speed could increase to the point where she could blitz G. Her strength could grow so much that she could easily overpower him. With a year of relentless training, she'd be too fast for G to even perceive. Rick admits that enduring such grueling training requires a level of madness that not everyone possesses, but Angelica does. Her determination sets her apart. Demonstrating the difference between natural talent and disciplined hard work, Rick knocks G to the ground. He warns G that if he wants to maintain his strength, he'll need to set aside his arrogance and train diligently. But G refuses to accept this truth. In denial, he creates a smokescreen and launches a desperate charge at Rick, showing he's learned nothing. Rick decides to end the match. As G charges toward him, Rick uses a precise technique called thread slash, slicing through GS' defenses and knocking him down. The crowd erupts in cheers as Rick is declared the winner. Angelica thanks him, vowing to work hard and someday reach his level of strength. Rick is glad to see her inspired and motivated again. As Angelica looks toward Snape, expecting him to be furious over GS' defeat, she's surprised to see him calm. Snape admits that while GS' loss is disappointing, it's also satisfying to watch the arrogant fighter get humbled. He may have lost his bets, but he's not too upset. Angelica teases Snape, reminding him that with no money left, he can't uphold the marriage contract and marry into a noble family. Snape, to her surprise, responds that it was never about the noble title for him. He genuinely liked Angelica. This revelation leaves her speechless. The next fight of the day is between Braun and Kevin. Kevin is eager to face Braun, knowing he's up against a formidable opponent. As the match begins, Kevin launches a series of rapid attacks while deftly dodging Braun's counters. Just as the fight is heating up, chaos erupts as G, now in a rampaging dragonic form, crashes into the stadium walls. His transformation has overwhelmed his mind, and he begins attacking the audience indiscriminately. The disruption enrages Kevin, who yells at G for ruining his match and endangering innocent people. G shifts his focus to Kevin and charges at him with his full power. Undeterred, Kevin stops G's punch with one hand and retaliates with a devastating blow, sending G flying and knocking him out. Rick and the others are stunned. G's strength rivals that of an A-rank adventurer, yet Kevin defeated him in a single punch. They realize Kevin's power is on par with an S-rank adventurer. Despite his incredible display, the match between Braun and Kevin is postponed to the next day due to the injuries caused by GS' rampage and the need to address potential lawsuits. Kevin, visibly disappointed, says he was looking forward to fighting Braun but accepts the delay. However, Braun notices something unusual. There's hesitation in Kevin's punches, as though he's holding something back. With no more matches scheduled for the day, the group heads to a restaurant. Angelica notices Rick isn't with them and asks about him. Reenet explains that Rick went on a quick 10-kilometer jog and is probably near the town's border by now. Cutting to Rick, he reaches the border but notices a distant mountain that reminds him of Reenet. He spots a dust cloud rising from the mountain and decides to investigate. There, he finds Kevin training in isolation. Kevin chose this remote location to train, assuming no one would stumble upon him. Since Rick is there, Kevin takes the opportunity to use him as a sparring partner. Caught off guard by Kevin's sudden attack, Rick quickly adapts and fights back. Kevin's speed and precision allow him to dodge Rick's punches effortlessly, thanks to his unique, foreseen ability. Rick throws another punch, and while Kevin blocks it, he's surprised by the sheer force behind it. Rick, on the other hand, finds it strange that Kevin can react to his powerful punches yet still gets hit by slower attacks in his matches. Kevin admits that he's been holding back in his fights. he confesses that he's grown so strong over time that most opponents no longer challenge him. For a long time, he's been searching for someone who could truly push him to his limits. Kevin continues explaining his frustration. His obsession with fighting led him to train relentlessly, but his strength eventually reached a level where no one could give him a real challenge. As a result, he started pulling his punches and limiting himself in matches to make them more exciting. However, seeing Rick's determination and skill reignites something in him. The sparring session becomes more intense. Rick, though not as naturally gifted as Kevin, uses his hard-earned techniques and strategies to keep up. Their exchange of blows is fast and powerful, and for the first time in a while, Kevin feels genuinely tested. As they continue, Rick notices that Kevin seems to be holding back emotionally as well, as though he's afraid to fully unleash his potential. Rick calls him out, urging him to stop limiting himself and embrace the fight. Inspired by Rick's words, Kevin decides to let loose and fight at full strength. Their sparring reaches a peak, with both fighters pushing each other to their limits. For Rick, it's a chance to test himself against someone far beyond his level of talent. For Kevin, it's a reminder of why he fell in love with fighting in the first place. As the session ends, both are left with a newfound respect for each other, eager to see where their paths will lead in the future. Kevin used to enjoy fighting in tournaments, but things changed when he became so strong that he could defeat any opponent with a single punch. While this ability impressed everyone at first, it made his matches predictable and boring. Despite this, he kept competing because it made the gym owner happy. With no real challenge in the ring, Kevin shifted his focus to training, finding joy only in pushing his limits and growing stronger. One day, he overheard the gym owner and his accountant discussing a problem. Tournament viewership was dropping because people found Kevin's easy wins dull, which hurt ticket sales. The accountant suggested finding ways to make the fights more exciting, but the gym owner refused to force Kevin to lose on purpose. Kevin felt conflicted. He didn't want to keep winning if it hurt the gym owner's business. During his next match, he let his opponent land a punch that he could have easily dodged, losing on purpose to keep the audience entertained. Over time, Kevin adapted to fighting in a way that kept the crowd guessing, holding back his true strength to make the matches more thrilling. But as a result, he hadn't been able to fight at full power in a long time. When Kevin shares his feelings with Rick, Rick understands. He tells Kevin that when he faces Braun in the upcoming match, there will be no need to hold back. In fact, if Kevin wants to survive, he'll have to fight with everything he's got. Before Kevin can respond, Rick walks away, leaving Kevin puzzled. The next day, the match between Braun and Kevin begins. To prevent any interruptions or harm to spectators, a magical barrier is set up around the arena. Kevin starts the fight with a series of punches, but Braun blocks them all effortlessly. Then, Kevin uses a special rolling punch, breaking through Braun's defense. Rick, watching from the sidelines, is amazed. Breaking Braun's guard is no easy feat. However, when Braun counters with a powerful punch, Kevin is forced to retreat. Acknowledging Braun's strength, Kevin admits he has been holding back in his fights for years to keep the audience entertained. He'd love to go all out, but if he does, the crowd will realize he's been hiding his true abilities. Braun understands Kevin's dilemma and doesn't judge him for it. In fact, he respects Kevin for fighting in a way that kept his fans engaged. To make the fight fair, Braun offers to use only 2 fingers and promises not to move from his spot. Kevin hesitates but attacks anyway. To his surprise, Braun deflects all his moves with ease, even embarrassing him at times. Frustrated, Kevin steps back. He wants to fight at full strength, but the fear of exposing his secret holds him back. Then, the gym owner shouts from the stands, telling Kevin to stop pretending to be weaker than he really is. Kevin protests, saying he's only been holding back to help the gym's business. But the gym owner reassures him that the business doesn't matter as much as Kevin achieving his dream of becoming the world's strongest fighter. Inspired, Kevin decides to stop hiding his strength. Apologizing to Braun for holding back, Kevin announces that he's ready to fight at full power. Charging forward, he throws a punch so powerful it creates a massive shockwave, forcing Braun to use 5 fingers to block it instead of just 2. Kevin follows up with a flurry of punches, including 2 roll fang punches that force Braun to block. Taking advantage of Braun's raised guard, Kevin lands a kick to his stomach. But Braun doesn't flinch, he catches Kevin's leg and hurls him across the arena. Kevin uses a steel body technique to break his fall, impressing the crowd. But as they watch him fight at full strength, they begin to murmur. It becomes clear that Kevin has been holding back in previous matches, and many spectators feel deceived. Their harsh comments reach Kevin's ears, but he knows there's no turning back. Determined, he focuses entirely on the fight. Kevin begins chanting an advanced 5th nature fire spell, unleashing a wave of hellflame toward Braun. The crowd is stunned. Beastmen like Kevin are generally terrible at magic, yet he's performing an advanced spell with ease. It's a testament to his intense training and raw talent. His skill level is revealed to be on par with Braun and other top fighters. However, Braun remains unfazed. With a casual kick, he sends a rock flying, using it to block the hellflame. The simplicity of Braun's move contrasts sharply with Kevin's effort, further highlighting Braun's immense power. Kevin's journey in the ring, from holding back for the crowd to finally embracing his true strength, marks a turning point. While he still has a long way to go to reach his ultimate dream, this fight with Braun is a reminder of what he stands for: pushing limits, facing challenges head-on, and earning respect not just for his strength but for his authenticity. Kevin starts his fight against Braun by using his advanced techniques. First, he uses Blink Step to close the distance between them instantly. Once he's in range, he casts a 7th nature spell to immobilize Braun, followed by an 8th nature meteor spell. Rick's party is impressed by Kevin's skill, but Rick grows worried. Kevin is proving to be much stronger than expected, and Rick knows this will push Braun to stop holding back. As the meteor descends, Braun commends Kevin's strength before casually destroying the meteor with a single strike. When the dust settles, Braun acknowledges Kevin's determination and promises to fight seriously as a sign of respect. He gives Kevin a symbolic, quarter thumbs up, an auspicious gesture that signals someone is about to face a serious challenge. Braun begins moving toward Kevin, and Kevin can instinctively sense that he's in for a brutal fight. Braun throws a punch, and though Kevin narrowly dodges, the sheer pressure from the blow sends him flying. Determined to keep fighting, Kevin uses every high-level spell he has in his arsenal, but Braun shrugs it all off without flinching. Braun then counters with a punch to Kevin's abdomen, launching him backward. The only reason Kevin survives is because he had layered multiple defensive techniques, but even then, the impact leaves him struggling to stand. For a moment, Kevin considers giving up, realizing he's hopelessly outmatched. Yet, his fighting spirit refuses to let him quit. Despite running out of mana, Kevin relies on his remaining stamina to keep going. Kevin fights valiantly, but his stamina soon gives out. Exhausted, he marvels at Braun's incredible strength, doubting that anyone else in the world could match him. Just as he's about to admit defeat, the crowd begins cheering for him. Moved by their support, Kevin finds the will to rise again. The spectators don't care that he held back in previous fights, they just want to see him give his all. Inspired, Kevin channels every ounce of his remaining strength into a single, ultimate punch. With no mana or stamina left, his fighting spirit fuels him to combine all his techniques into one final attack. The resulting blow is the most powerful move he's ever performed. Even so, Braun remains unharmed. Braun praises Kevin for his fighting spirit and asks if he's truly given it his all. Although his attack didn't hurt Braun, Kevin notices that he managed to push him back slightly. Feeling satisfied with his effort, Kevin accepts his defeat without regret. Braun then delivers a final punch, knocking Kevin unconscious. Even in defeat, Kevin lies on the ground with a smile on his face. After Braun's victory, he returns backstage to congratulations from Rick and Angelica. Since Braun is advancing to the finals, their party is guaranteed to win the prize jewel no matter the outcome. Rick, however, is terrified at the idea of facing Braun in the final match. He plans to withdraw, wanting no part of Braun's overwhelming power. But Braun insists that Rick cannot back out, saying he's looking forward to their fight. As Braun walks away, Rick becomes so anxious that he starts losing hair. Later, Kevin recovers after receiving medical treatment. While reading a newspaper article about his fight, he learns that some people are angry now that they know he was holding back as champion. Kevin worries his reputation as a role model has been ruined. But the gym owner reassures him, pointing out that children outside the arena still admire him. The owner adds that Kevin's extraordinary final attack showed a level of strength even he hadn't seen before. Kevin admits that he hadn't planned the attack, it was something he improvised in the heat of battle. Still, he laments losing the fight. The gym owner doesn't see the loss as a failure. Instead, he encourages Kevin to see it as motivation to train harder and come back stronger. Kervin is touched by the owner's kindness and asks why he cares so much. The owner reveals that he sees Kervin as a son and would do anything to support him. As they're talking, Bron enters the room. Realizing he's interrupted a heartfelt moment, he decides to stay anyway. He asks Kervin how he's feeling, and Kervin jokingly replies that most of his bones are broken. Bron offers to heal him, but Kervin declines. He explains that it's been a long time since he's felt pain like this, and he wants to save it. Kervin recalls Rick's earlier words about not needing to hold back against Bron and admits that losing to Bron has reignited his passion for fighting. Now, Kervin looks forward to watching the final match between Bron and Rick, eager to see how their battle unfolds. Snape arrives at Rick's inn and finds Angelica outside Rick's locked door, trying to convince him to come out. Rick has barricaded himself inside, refusing to face Bron in the tournament finals because he's convinced he'll die if he does. Snape understands Rick's fears but reminds him that everyone is looking forward to the match. Snape appeals to Rick's sense of responsibility and the effort put into the tournament, emphasizing how much it will disappoint the crowd if Rick backs out. But Rick remains firm, saying his life is more important than the tournament or the spectators. Before leaving, Snape uses his showman voice to guilt-trip Rick, talking about the hard work and money spent on the event. Feeling guilty but terrified, Rick still refuses to budge. Angelica tries a different tactic, casually saying it's fine if Rick dies since he could just be resurrected. Rick snaps back, saying she doesn't understand how terrible dying feels and shouldn't downplay it. Angelica gives up, frustrated, and tells Rick she has lost respect for him as a teacher before leaving. Mazette enters and speaks to Rick, bringing up something odd. Bron had a detailed training plan ready when he first joined the party. Rick hadn't thought about it before, but it was strange for Bron to have something so prepared. Mazette explains that the plan wasn't random, it was something Bron developed years ago to train someone who could one day fight him as an equal. Fighting is central to ORC culture, a way to connect and communicate with others. However, Bron's overwhelming strength has always made real, meaningful fights impossible since he often kills his opponents by accident. His dream is to finally fight someone as strong as him. Mazette reminds Rick that while he can back out, Bron has been eagerly waiting for this match. He suggests Rick give Bron the fight he's been dreaming of. Rick has a flashback to when Rionette first introduced him to Bron. Upon shaking Rick's hand, Bron instantly assessed that Rick had no martial arts training and almost no mana. Bron bluntly told Rick he lacked the qualifications to be an adventurer at his current level. However, Bron assured Rick that with hard work, it wasn't impossible to succeed, but Rick would need to train 100 times harder than others to make up for his weaknesses. In the present, Angelica is still furious that Rick refuses to fight Bron. She calls him pathetic, though Mazette admits he understands why Rick is scared. Mazette adds that no ordinary person would willingly go through Bron's training regimen, let alone face him in a fight. Angelica is curious about the training and asks if it was really that bad. Mazette describes it as pure torture, a level of grueling effort that would break most people. He says it's a miracle Rick didn't completely lose his mind, though he did snap a few times during the process. Angelica begins to sympathize, realizing how much Rick endured despite lacking natural talent. Elise overhears their conversation and surprises Angelica by revealing that Rick does have a skill. Angelica is shocked, as she's never seen Rick use any abilities. Mazette explains that Rick's skill is powerful but difficult to activate and comes with harsh consequences for his body. Because of this, Bron strictly forbade Rick from using it until he could control it properly. That evening, Rionette visits Rick in his room. Rick hesitates, asking if she thinks he's pathetic for avoiding the fight. Rionette reassures him that she doesn't see him that way. She understands why he's scared but admits she would admire him even more if he found the courage to face Bron, even if it's not something he's obligated to do. Her words stick with Rick, leaving him deep in thought. The next day, excitement fills the arena as the final match approaches. The announcer hypes up the crowd by listing the prizes, a large sum of money, rare gems, and a couple's trip to a hot spring. Rionette and Angelica check on Rick before the match. Angelica asks if he's okay, and Rick insists he is, though his terrified expression says otherwise. Sensing his hesitation, Rionette leans in and offers Rick a personal reward if he performs well in the fight. Her encouragement snaps him out of his fear, and his resolve hardens. Rick steps into the arena to face Bron, declaring that he'll give the fight everything he's got. As the match begins, Rick charges forward with incredible speed, moving faster than the eye can follow. In an instant, he launches a flurry of attacks against Braun, and by the time the dust settles, Rick has successfully cut Braun's arm, drawing blood. The crowd erupts in shock and amazement. Braun, impressed, compliments Rick's strength. Meanwhile, Snape watches from the sidelines, completely baffled. He couldn't follow what just happened. Reinette explains that in a fraction of a second, Rick closed the distance to Braun and unleashed nearly a dozen rapid attacks. By outmaneuvering Braun's defenses, Rick managed to use his skill, Thread Slash, to land a decisive blow. It's a remarkable display of skill and determination, showing just how far Rick has come. Rick charges back at Braun, moving at lightning speed. He throws a powerful punch, but Braun blocks it easily. Undeterred, Rick launches a barrage of quick strikes, forcing Braun to defend. When Rick realizes he's getting nowhere, he backs off, only to leap off the arena wall for a heel kick aimed straight at Braun. Again, Braun blocks the attack and counters with a punch. Rick narrowly ducks under it and follows up with another Thread Slash, slicing into Braun's stomach. Reinette, having trained under Rick and understanding the immense effort it takes to reach his and Braun's level of strength, is astonished. However, she's puzzled by Rick's sudden courage, given how scared he was moments earlier. Angelica notices the change too and asks Reinette what she said to motivate him. Reinette casually admits she promised Rick she'd join him on the couple's hot spring trip if he wins. To Rick, that offer seems more valuable than his life, so he's fighting with everything he has. Angelica is flustered at the thought of Rick and Reinette spending a romantic trip together, but Reinette doesn't seem bothered. Frustrated, Angelica decides to focus on the fight instead of her feelings. Rick's relentless attacks convince Braun to get serious. Deciding to fight at full strength, Braun winds up a punch. The sheer force behind it is so intense that Rick has no choice but to dodge. The punch creates a shockwave more powerful than level 5 magic, reminding Rick why he was so terrified of this fight. But Braun doesn't let up, he launches a series of devastating punches. Rick does his best to evade them, but Braun uses the chaos to sneak behind him and prepares to land a clean, crushing blow. Just before Braun's fist connects, Rick activates Air Cushion, a level 1 spell, to redirect the punch away from him. It's already impressive that such a basic spell could block Braun's attack, but what shocks everyone even more is that Rick cast it instantly, without chanting or an incantation. Instant spellcasting is incredibly rare, even for elite fighters like Braun. Braun acknowledges Rick's skill, admitting he can't perform such clean incantationless magic himself. Rick humbly explains that he learned it through grueling training with Elise and Mazette. Elise and Mazette confirm this, adding that Rick worked so hard he even vaporized himself during practice. Despite the hardships, Rick persevered, and his efforts paid off. Rick dashes toward Braun again, determined to keep up the pressure. Braun responds by creating a shockwave to halt Rick's momentum. However, Rick quickly sidesteps, circling around to land a flowing strike. Braun blocks the attack effortlessly and counters with a punch so powerful that it sends Rick flying across the arena. But Rick refuses to give up. He rebounds off debris and charges straight at Braun, this time from the front. The crowd watches nervously, thinking Rick has made a grave mistake. Approaching Braun head-on leaves him wide open for a counterattack. As expected, Braun launches a devastating hurricane punch, but Rick leaps into the air to avoid it. However, being airborne leaves Rick vulnerable, with no way to dodge Braun's follow-up attacks. Just as Braun's next punch closes in, Rick uses Air Cushion again, this time propelling himself sideways to avoid the strike. While in midair, Rick fires an air shot at Braun, but when the dust settles, Braun emerges mostly unharmed, his resilience on full display. Before resuming the fight, Braun pauses to compliment Rick. He acknowledges how much Rick has grown over the past 2 years and praises his determination and mental strength for enduring Braun's rigorous training. Braun admits he's proud of Rick, a rare and sincere compliment from someone as stoic as him. Rick knows Braun's praise is genuine, but he also realizes that Braun doesn't just want to see his student succeed, he wants an equal opponent. Rick recalls how Mazette and Elise mentioned Braun's dream of fighting someone on equal terms. Braun, slightly embarrassed, brushes it off, claiming they exaggerated. While he does desire a fair fight, he wouldn't call it a dream. Still, Rick understands the importance of this moment to Braun and wants to honor him. Rick declares he will fight with everything he has, not just for himself, but to give Braun the battle he's always hoped for. Hearing this, Braun smiles warmly and says he's lucky to have met Rick. With a sense of camaraderie building between them, Bronn decides it's time to share a story, a piece of history about the Orichel Fist, his legendary fighting style. He begins by recounting his past as a young ORC. Even as a child, Bronn stood out among his peers. He wasn't just physically stronger than other orcs, he was also far more intelligent. But this uniqueness came with a price. Bronn struggled to relate to his kin. They couldn't understand him, and he felt isolated. To bridge the gap, Bronn started teaching his fellow orcs skills they had never known. He showed them how to make fire, build shelters, and improve their lives. His teachings transformed ORC society, elevating them to a new level of civilization. However, this progress had an unintended consequence. The other orcs began to revere Bronn as a god. Instead of bringing him closer to his people, his newfound status only deepened his loneliness. Despite his achievements, Bronn yearned for a connection, a bond built on mutual respect and understanding, not worship. As Bronn finishes his story, Rick gains a deeper appreciation for his mentor's struggles. The fight between them now carries even greater meaning. It's not just about winning or losing, it's about honoring Bronn's desire for equality and Rick's journey of growth. With this understanding, Rick prepares to give Bronn the battle of his life, not as a student, but as a worthy opponent. During a fierce storm one day, Bronn left his pack for a short while. When he returned, he found a devastating scene. Every single one of his people had died in an accident caused by the storm. Bronn stood there silently, not because he failed to save them, but because he felt absolutely nothing. Even as his entire family lay dead before him, he realized he was completely alone in the world. Sometime later, Bronn was sitting by a fire, reading a book after defeating a wyvern. Suddenly, a man burst out of the bushes and attacked him. Bronn dodged effortlessly, surprising the man, who was not expecting an ORC to be so agile. The man also noticed Bronn reading a book and saw the slain wyvern nearby. This was odd because the man had come to these woods on a quest to exterminate the orcs terrorizing the area. However, Bronn seemed calm and intelligent, not at all like the typical orcs. Realizing his mistake, the man apologized for the sudden attack. Bronn assured him it was fine, explaining he was used to humans attacking him. Intrigued, the man decided to sit and talk with Bronn. Over a long conversation, the man learned Bronn's life story and his struggle with loneliness caused by his exceptional abilities. Bronn admitted his deepest desire, to fight someone as strong as he was. But he believed such a dream was impossible. The man could relate, as he too had an unfulfilled dream. Bronn grew curious, so the man shared more about himself. He revealed that he once fought alongside the legendary hero Yamto, a figure so famous that Bronn had read about him in a book. That book detailed Yamto's incredible adventures, which supposedly happened many years ago. To Bronn's surprise, the man admitted he was the author of that very book, and every word in it was true. The man's dream was to defeat Kaiser Alpia, a powerful foe mentioned in Yamto's stories. This daunting goal piqued Bronn's interest. It might even help him find someone as strong as himself. Inspired, Bronn decided to make defeating Kaiser Alpia his mission too. With this shared purpose, Bronn and the man formed the Orichel Fist party. Over time, strong fighters joined their ranks, just as Bronn had hoped. Each member had unique abilities, but none could match Bronn in pure physical combat. Bronn, determined to find someone equal, devised an intense training regimen to push his comrades to their limits. However, Mazet, one of their teammates, reviewed the plan and bluntly told Bronn that no one on Earth could survive such training. Realizing Mazet was right, Bronn gave up on his dream of finding an equal. But now, standing before him, Rick has proven himself capable of rivaling Bronn's strength. For Bronn, this is a moment of pure joy. Bronn apologized for interrupting their fight with his story, but Rick couldn't help reflecting on their time training together. He realized Bronn didn't just want a fight, he wanted an all-out, no-holds-barred brawl. So far, Rick had relied on magic like thread slashes and air shot, but he remembered Bronn's explanation of the quarter thumbs-up gesture among orcs. It's a challenge that signifies both fighters abandon defense and evasion to trade raw, full-strength blows. Though he knew he'd regret it, Rick extended his hand in the quarter thumbs-up. Bronn, shocked but thrilled, returned the gesture. Internally, Rick apologized to himself and Reinette, knowing he probably wouldn't win the fight, and therefore wouldn't get to take her to the hot spring. Reinette, however, found Rick's gesture sweet, admiring his willingness to make Bronn's dream come true. Both fighters launched full-force punches at each other, their fists colliding with explosive power. The impact began to destabilize the magical barrier around the arena. Mazet, realizing the danger, asked Elise to assist with her magic. Elise agreed, helping him teleport everyone in the arena to safety, except for Kervin, who was strong enough to withstand the chaos. Kervin rushed over, asking what was happening. Mazet explained that everyone had been evacuated so Rick and Braun could fight without worrying about causing harm. Just as the explanation ended, the arena's barrier shattered completely. The force from Rick and Braun's punches was so immense that it caused multiple explosions across the battlefield. Rick managed to land more punches overall, but Braun's hits were far stronger, and the damage was starting to show. Each of Braun's strikes took a heavy toll on Rick, who was visibly struggling. Braun's overwhelming strength sent Rick flying once again, causing him to crash land awkwardly after attempting a backflip. He hit the ground face first and fought to get back on his feet. As Rick stood, battered and bruised, he thought back to his training. He refused to let the fight end like this, summoning every ounce of determination he had left to continue. For Rick, this wasn't just about winning, it was about honoring Braun's dream and proving the strength he had worked so hard to achieve. Rick mustered what little strength he had left and charged at Braun with a punch, but Braun met him with one of his own. The two clashed again, each landing blows to the other's face. Braun, fully enjoying the battle now, landed a massive punch that sent Rick flying into the wall, accidentally destroying part of the stadium in the process. Rick seemed completely defeated, barely able to move. His injuries were severe, and his body was at its limit. Despite his impressive performance against Braun, Rick thought it was over and assumed he could finally rest, believing Braun would be satisfied. But as he glanced at Braun, it was clear that Braun wasn't ready to stop. The fire in his eyes showed he wanted more. Rick's body was so battered that he could only move a single finger. Angelica, watching from the sidelines, thought there was no way Rick could keep going after such a brutal blow. However, the others disagreed, insisting that Rick wasn't done yet. They had seen him fight before and knew he had an incredible resolve to push beyond his limits. Rick clenched his fists, and a red aura began to envelop his body. He activated his inborn skill, a power fueled by his will rather than magic or physical strength. Braun was stunned, he had no idea Rick could use this ability. It turned out to be a secret among the party members, who had secretly trained Rick to control this skill without Braun's knowledge. The condition to activate it was simple but demanding. Rick had to face an opponent far stronger than himself and be prepared to exceed his limits. With his skill active, Rick was no longer just an underdog, he was now truly Braun's equal. Rick charged at Braun with a punch far more powerful than anything he had thrown before. Braun countered as usual, but this time, Rick didn't get knocked back. He held his ground, trading blow after blow with Braun. The clash became more intense, shaking the remains of the arena. As they fought, Braun came to a profound realization. He had believed that finding someone as strong as him would end his loneliness. But now, he understood he hadn't been alone for a long time. His friends, those who trained Rick to make this fight possible, had gone to great lengths for his happiness. Their actions meant more to Braun than any equal fight ever could. The battle raged on, but exhaustion was catching up to both fighters. Each punch carried the last vestiges of their strength, and it was clear that the next hit would decide the fight. Gathering every ounce of power they had left, Rick and Braun charged at each other one final time. Their heads collided in a devastating headbutt, and the impact echoed for miles. When the dust settled, both Rick and Braun were still standing, bloodied and bruised but defiant. Rick let out a weak laugh and complimented Braun, admitting that even after giving everything he had, he still couldn't bring him down. Moments later, Rick collapsed to the ground, his body finally giving out. Braun, steadying himself, told Rick he wasn't the loser. The only reason the fight ended the way it did was because Rick chose to honor Braun's dream of an equal fistfight. For that, Braun considered Rick the true victor. With those words, Braun also collapsed from exhaustion. Rick woke up days later in a hospital bed, the champion's belt resting on his chest and Reinette sitting beside him. She explained that everyone had been worried since he had been unconscious for so long. Rick wasn't too surprised, recalling that the last time he used his inborn skill, it left him asleep for an entire week. This time, though, his training had clearly paid off. As Rick processed everything, he noticed the champion's belt and was confused. He distinctly remembered collapsing before Braun, which should have meant Braun won the fight. Reinette explained that Braun had insisted Rick take the belt, considering him the true victor. Rick, touched by Braun's acknowledgement, couldn't help but joke about Bronn being like a boss in a video game. If Bronn had wanted to, he could have healed himself and kept going with more health bars. Even though Rick had held his own using only his fists, he knew that if Bronn had gone all out with his full arsenal, the fight wouldn't have been nearly as close. Bronn reassured Rick of his strength and took a moment to thank the rest of the party for their efforts in training him. Although the others tried to deny their involvement, Bronn saw right through them. Rick, however, had no idea they had been working behind the scenes to help him, and he was both surprised and grateful. Bronn then removed a jewel embedded in the champion's belt and handed it to Reinette. She brought over a replacement jewel that she had prepared to make the belt appear untouched. Aelys used her magic to infuse the fake jewel with energy, making it almost indistinguishable from the original. Angelica, seeing all this, decided to turn a blind eye and pretend nothing suspicious was happening. As everyone wrapped up, Rick remembered something he had been curious about and turned to Bronn. He asked about Reinhard, the mysterious figure from Bronn's flashback. Bronn paused, his expression serious, as he prepared to explain more about the man and his connection to their story. Rick is curious about Reinhard, a legendary figure who seems to have lived for centuries. He wonders how Reinhard is still alive, but Bronn explains that Reinhard has a special ability that slows his aging process. Bronn isn't sure exactly how old Reinhard is, but he knows that Reinhard's power helps keep him young. It's been a couple of years since Bronn last saw Reinhard, and Rick wonders if Reinhard is on some important mission. However, the truth is much simpler. Reinhard is actually just avoiding his publisher because he missed the deadline for one of his books. That evening, Snake meets with Kerwin to tell him that both Rick and Bronn have decided not to become the new champions, and they've returned the champion's belt. This means that Kerwin is next in line for the title. However, Kerwin is not thrilled with the idea of becoming champion again just because of a technicality. He doesn't want the title under these circumstances. The next morning, everyone is getting ready to leave. Rick, having packed too much food, has to buy a carriage to carry all of it. Aelys is sad to see Angelica leave but promises she will visit again. Angelica also plans to train under Bronn, which surprises Rick. He asks her if she's trying to get herself killed, as Bronn's training is extremely tough. However, Angelica is determined and says she knows it will be difficult, but she's willing to endure anything to become stronger. She wants to catch up to Rick and surpass him one day, and Rick is excited to see how strong she'll get by the time they meet again. Angelica asks if Rick plans to run back home, and Rick says yes. It's almost 500 kilometers away, but he's confident he can make it. He ran here in just a few days, so he thinks he can do the same going back. However, Angelica points out that the food Rick bought will take several months to reach its destination by horse, so all of it will spoil before it arrives. Aelys reassures her that it's not a problem, and she uses some magic to help. Then, Mate uses a special spell to speed up the horse so much that it's faster than a rocket. Now the journey won't take long at all. With everything packed, Rick gets ready to leave, but Reinette stops him. She asks when they are going to go on their hot spring trip since they still haven't set a date. Rick gets flustered and says he didn't win the fight with Bronn, so he feels he doesn't deserve such a reward, even though he wants to go. Mizet, understanding Rick's thoughts, suggests they race back to the castle. If Rick wins the race, he gets to go on the hot spring trip with Reinette, but if he loses, he'll have to do 10 times the usual training. Rick doesn't like the sound of that and tries to negotiate to make it 5 times the training, but before he can finish, Mate and Bronn start running. Rick quickly joins the race, determined to win so that he can take Reinette to the hot spring and avoid the painful training. He really doesn't want to face 10 times the training, so he's motivated to win. This concludes the story with a fun and light-hearted race. Who will win? Rick, determined to avoid extra training, is ready to give it his all in this final race. Will he win the hot spring trip or face the tough consequences? Thank you for watching. Make sure to hit the like button. Share the video and don't forget to subscribe. Stay tuned for more exciting adventures.